Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I think back to my childhood, there are a lot of small memories that blur together like colors smudged by rain on a window. But there are also memories so sharp that even decades later, they still cut into me when I think about them. One of those days started out like any other, and if I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't believe it happened. I was 7 years old. I had a routine. My school was small, just a couple hallways with faded tile floors, and my babysitter lived only a block from the schoolyard. I used to walk there every day after class ended. Sometimes I'd run if it was cold, clutching my backpack straps in my fists, my breath puffing out in front of me in the late autumn air. Sometimes I'd take my time, scuffing my shoes in the gravel beside the cracked sidewalk, looking at the maple leaves and wondering how something could be so red it almost looked fake. That day it was chilly. The sun was already starting to dip low even though it wasn't that late, and I remember feeling the cold wind sting my cheeks. I was walking the same way I always did, past the low fence that bordered the church parking lot, past the big oak tree with its bare branches stretching up like thin fingers. My backpack was heavy with old library books. I was staring down at my feet, watching them hit the pavement one after the other, just thinking about the snack my babysitter might give me when I got there. She always had peanut butter crackers, or those little chocolate cookies that left brown smears on your fingers. I was hungry. That was all I was thinking about. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing seemed wrong. Then I heard a car engine. I didn't even look up at first. Cars passed that street all the time, but I noticed the car slowed down as it came closer. I looked up and saw a white sedan rolling up beside me on the road, matching my pace. I can still see the rust around the bottom edges of the doors, the peeling paint near the back wheel well. The window on the driver's side was rolled down, and I saw a man leaning towards it, his arm hanging out casually like he did it all the time. He had brown hair, sort of long and unwashed, sticking out from under a baseball cap. His beard was patchy and thin. His eyes looked so dark, I couldn't tell what color they were. At first, I just stopped walking. My knees felt like they locked up all on their own. My backpack slipped a little off one shoulder, but I didn't even fix it. He started waving his arm, motioning for me to come closer, and his voice was sharp and loud when he shouted over the sound of the car engine. "Come here. Come here." My heart felt like it flipped over in my chest. I just stood there, frozen on the sidewalk, gripping my backpack straps so hard that my knuckles turned white. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just shook my head over and over again, feeling tears start to well up in my eyes, even though I wasn't crying yet. I remember thinking if I cried he might get out of the car, and I didn't want to see him move, didn't want to see him walk towards me. I just kept shaking my head no, no, no. His face twisted in a strange way, like he was disgusted or angry or maybe disappointed. I still can't tell. He looked at me for a long time, not saying anything, before he finally spoke again. His voice was lower that time, almost like he was saying it to himself, but I could still hear it. "Stay away from Christina." Then he stepped on the gas, and the car rolled away down the road. I watched the back of it get smaller until it turned a corner and disappeared. I stood there on the sidewalk for what felt like forever, my legs shaking so badly I thought they would give out. The wind felt colder all of a sudden. My face felt hot, but my fingers were numb. I don't know how long I stood there before my body moved again, but when it did, I ran. I ran the rest of the way to my babysitter's house without stopping, my backpack thumping against my back, my lungs burning from the cold air and fear. When I got there, she asked me why I was so out of breath, and I told her I just wanted to get there fast. I didn't tell her about the man. I didn't tell my parents either. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe I thought I'd get in trouble for stopping on the way. Maybe I thought they wouldn't believe me, or that telling them would make it worse somehow. I just kept it to myself. After a while, I stopped thinking about it. It became one of those small, blurry memories pushed to the back of my mind. I still saw Christina at school. She was one of those friends who could make you feel like you were the most special person in the world one day and make you feel like you didn't exist the next. I never understood her. She was pretty and always had her hair braided perfectly. Sometimes she'd share her colored pens with me. Sometimes she'd shove me when teachers weren't looking. We went back and forth like that for years. I didn't think about the man again. Life just kept moving forward. one day blending into the next. Then came 5th grade. I was older. Things felt more serious at that age. Kids weren't just mean because they didn't know better. They were mean on purpose. By that point, Christina wasn't my best friend anymore. I kept my distance from her most of the time, sticking close to a couple of other girls who liked reading and making up stupid games on the playground. There was another girl too, one who'd been around since kindergarten, the type who'd swing between ignoring me and suddenly wanting to be my friend again. One lunch period, she asked me if I wanted to go with her to the pop machine in the back hall. It wasn't really allowed to leave the classroom during lunch without permission, but everyone did it anyway. It felt grown up to sneak off for a few minutes to get a drink from the machine humming in the dim hallway. I said yes because why not? It felt nice to be included. I remember the sound of our shoes echoing off the walls as we walked down the empty hallway. She pressed the buttons on the machine for me because I didn't have enough money that day, and she told me I could just pay her back later. I picked an orange pop. I liked how it fizzed on my tongue and left a sugary taste in my throat. We walked back to class with the cold can in my hand, my stomach growling from hunger. When we got there, Christina was standing near my desk with this smirk on her face. She told me people had been messing with my lunch and that she was nice enough to bring it back for me. I didn't think about it much at the time. I just felt annoyed that someone had touched my stuff, but also relieved that nothing was missing. I sat down and opened my lunch bag, pulled out my sandwich, and cracked open the can of orange pop. The first sip tasted funny, almost like chemicals or something burnt. I pulled the can away from my lips and looked at it, then took another small sip just to check. The taste hit the back of my throat in a way that made me gag immediately. I spit it out into my napkin, my eyes watering. My tongue felt weird, almost numb, and a bitter smell was rising from the can that didn't smell like orange pop at all. My stomach twisted with a deep, cold fear I hadn't felt since that day on the sidewalk with the man in the white car. I pushed back from my desk and ran to the water fountain in the hallway, shoving my mouth under the stream of lukewarm water, spitting it out over and over again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold myself up. I don't know how the teachers found out. Maybe someone told them, or maybe I looked so sick that they knew something was wrong. The rest of the day is a blur of flashing lights and loud voices. The police were called. My parents came to the school. Christina and her sister were taken out of class. Later I found out they had poured Lysol into my drink. If I had swallowed any more of it, I probably would have ended up in the hospital or worse. The smell of Lysol still makes me sick to my stomach. They got suspended for a few days, but nothing really changed. The school was too small to keep them away from me. They just came back like nothing had happened. I had to keep sitting in the same classroom with them, pretending that everything was normal. I never drank anything I didn't open myself after that. I stopped eating lunch some days, just to be safe. Sometimes I think about that man in the white car, about how he told me to stay away from Christina. I wonder how he knew. I wonder who he was. Was he trying to protect me or scare me? Was he someone who knew her family? Someone who had seen what she was capable of? Or was he just a random stranger saying something that stuck with me because it made no sense at the time? I don't know. I'll probably never know. But sometimes, when I'm walking down a quiet street alone and I hear a car coming up behind me, my chest tightens and I feel 7 years old again, frozen on that cracked sidewalk with the cold wind on my face, gripping my backpack straps so tight my fingers ache. And I hear his voice in my head like he's right beside me. Stay away from Christina. I didn't stay away, not completely. I went on being her friend sometimes, letting her back in, forgiving her every time she hurt me until that last day when forgiveness wasn't an option anymore. Even now, years later, I wonder if she ever thinks about what she did to me. I wonder if she even remembers. But I remember. I remember the taste of Lysol in my mouth and the way my throat burned with fear. I remember the feeling of my heart hammering against my ribs as I ran to my babysitter's house. I remember the way that man looked at me like he knew something I didn't, something I wasn't ready to understand yet. And most of all, I remember how easy it was to go from feeling safe to feeling like your whole life could end in a second, all because of someone else's choice. It's a memory I carry with me wherever I go, a reminder that there are some things you never see coming until it's too late to run. When I was 4 years old, my father, my stepmother, and my baby brother all died in a highway collision with a semi-truck. I don't have any memory of it. At that age, your world is small. You only remember toys, smells, tastes, and warm arms holding you. Not many faces, just warmth or fear, comfort or discomfort. My parents had split up before that. My father wasn't in my life every day. He was more like a voice on the phone or a presence that my mother sighed about. I think back now and realize that to me he was almost like a shadow, someone adults spoke of, but who I didn't see enough to build real memories around. They were driving on Highway 84 in West Texas, between Lubbock and Abilene. It's a long highway, nothing but dry dirt, low bushes, utility poles lined up like watchmen guarding the endless stretch of road, and the sun hanging heavy in the sky all day. Sometimes the wind carries dirt in low red clouds across the asphalt, making it look like the land is always restless. That day, they were coming to pick me up. They were driving from Albuquerque to Houston and planned to stop in my town to get me for a few months. I imagine my baby brother crying in his car seat, his small fists flailing, his neck too weak to hold his head upright for long. My stepmother must have been twisting around in her seat, trying to soothe him. Maybe she shook a rattle or tried giving him a pacifier. My dad must have been focused on the road, feeling impatient at the crying or worried about something else altogether. Bills, work, life. They decided to pull over. Maybe the crying got too loud, or maybe my stepmother was worried something was wrong with the baby. They stopped on the shoulder. The semi-driver was coming down a hill. He was over his hours. Exhaustion is something that settles in your bones. Your eyes stay open, your hands grip the wheel, but your brain flickers off and on like bad headlights. He veered onto the shoulder and hit them. Their car wasn't moving. They never had a chance. I imagine the sound of the impact echoing across the empty land, louder than anything else around for miles. Metal twisting, glass shattering, tires bursting. Then fire. That kind of fire burns hot, black smoke rising into the sky. If anyone saw it from far off, it must have looked like a funeral pyre right there on the road, like something ancient and merciless. No one but the semi-driver survived. I wonder sometimes if he remembers them every time he drives, if he still drives at all. I wonder if he wakes up at night feeling the steering wheel vibrating under his palms, the jolt of impact, the sudden nothing after it. Or maybe he never thought of them again. People deal with tragedy in different ways. Years later, when I grew up, I ended up at Texas Tech in Lubbock. Life is strange like that. You circle back to places you never planned to. Every time I drove between Lubbock and DFW, I passed the place where they died. I didn't know the exact spot back then, but I knew it was somewhere along that road. Sometimes I would drive in silence, staring out at the dry land, trying to imagine them there on the side of the road. I tried to imagine my father standing there, his arm leaning on the roof of the car, waiting for my stepmother to finish strapping my brother back in. I tried to imagine them laughing or tired or fighting quietly. I wondered if they were happy then, or if it was just another day. One evening, after classes, I was in the library working on a research project. My mind wandered, like it often did when the sun started setting and the orange light filtered through the high windows, making everything look like it was coated in dust. I started searching online about the accident. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe details, maybe a police report, maybe their names printed officially somewhere as proof that they existed and weren't just half-formed shadows in my head. I found an article. It was about the accident, from a local paper archived online. It mentioned the crash, the fire, the driver surviving. It also mentioned something else. A local person who saw the accident, someone who lived nearby, and called for help. They said that even years later, they sometimes saw a young family walking along the side of the highway. A man, a woman, and a baby. Always walking, always looking like they were on their way somewhere, but never getting closer to their destination. When I read that, my chest felt tight. I didn't believe in ghosts, I still don't. But something about that story hit me deeper than anything else ever had. They weren't going anywhere. Their lives ended there. They were on their way to me, but they never arrived. And even in the minds of strangers, they were still on that journey that would never end. I closed my laptop and just sat there for a long time, staring at the carpeted floor of the library, the patterns of triangles and squares that I had never really noticed before. I felt tears roll down my cheeks. It was strange because I didn't even know them. My father was just a name and a blurred face in one photograph. My stepmother was someone I never even met properly. My baby brother was a stranger, but they were my blood. They were people who were supposed to be part of my life. That emptiness sat heavy in me for days after that. After a few weeks, I drove out to the highway. I stopped at a gas station to ask some locals about the accident. They were older people, lined faces, sunburnt skin from working outside. I was surprised at how many of them remembered it. One man said he was working construction nearby that summer. Another woman said her husband drove past the scene just after it happened. They told me roughly where it was. I thanked them and left, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I drove until I thought I was near. There was no sign, no marker, nothing to show that lives ended there. Just a long empty shoulder with bits of trash scattered around, plastic bags, cups, cigarette butts, shredded tires. I pulled over and sat there with the engine off. It was so quiet that I could hear the ticking of my cooling engine. The air smelled like hot asphalt dirt and the faint sharp smell of metal from my car. I got out and stood there. The wind blew my hair across my face. I looked around. There was nothing to see, just the road, the dry grass, a fence running along the far side of the shoulder, some cattle grazing far in the distance. But I imagined them there. My father holding my baby brother, my stepmother brushing her hair out of her eyes, the car door open, the hot wind rushing in. I imagined them turning and seeing the truck coming down the hill. I wondered if they had a moment to realize, or if it was just nothingness after the sound of screeching tires. I stood there for a long time. Cars drove past me, shaking my car slightly with each gust of air. I wondered if any of them noticed me standing there, and what they thought. Probably nothing. Just another person stretching their legs on a long drive. I stayed there until the sun began to set, the sky turning pink and orange, shadows stretching long across the highway. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I tried to send them something. Respect. Grief. A recognition of their lives. I felt my chest tighten again, that deep, empty feeling. They were coming to pick me up. They were coming to take me for the summer. Maybe my baby brother would have sat next to me in the back seat. Maybe my father would have shown me how to skip rocks across a pond. Maybe my stepmother would have taught me how to braid hair. But none of that happened. They were just gone. Eventually, I got back into my car. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. As I drove away, I kept looking at the side mirror until the spot disappeared behind me. I drove in silence for a long time, my eyes blurry from tears. The land rolled by, flat and empty, the fence poles flicking past rhythmically like the ticking of a clock. I still drive past that stretch of highway sometimes. Each time I feel that same tightness in my chest. I think about exhausted drivers, about the decisions that take a life in a split second. I think about how people keep moving forward after loss, how we carry the dead with us without realizing it. They become shadows in our minds, reminders of roads not taken, words never spoken, hugs never given. Years later, I still don't have memories of them, just their absence. Just the knowledge that my father had a favorite song I never heard him sing, that my baby brother never learned to walk, that my stepmother probably had dreams that no one remembers now. The only thing left is the empty space they should have filled in my life. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night, my headlights cutting through the darkness, I think about them. I think about how fragile life is, how the road stretches on endlessly in front of you until suddenly it doesn't. I think about how they never made it to their destination, how they died trying to come see me. I think about the people who saw the crash, the people who said they sometimes see them still walking along the highway, always trying to reach somewhere they never will. And in those moments, I grip the steering wheel tighter. I keep my eyes open. I stay awake, because I know that each second, each mile, is a gift that can disappear without warning. And I drive on, with the shadows of people I never knew riding silently with me down the long, dark road. I was sitting in my room, hunched over my computer desk, staring at the bright screen in front of me. It was late at night, probably close to 2 a.m. The rest of the house was quiet, completely silent except for the soft hum of my computer fan and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards shifting in the cool night air. I had my headphones off because I liked listening to the silence sometimes when I worked. The only light in the room came from my screen, casting a cold glow across my desk, my arms, and the bit of floor I could see near my feet. Everything else was drowned in shadows. I was staying with family for a few weeks. It was the same house I had been visiting every summer since I was born. I knew every inch of it, every squeaky floorboard, every creaky door hinge, every window latch that stuck when it rained. Even with that, I still tried to be as quiet as possible at night, especially when getting up for the bathroom. I didn't want to wake up my cousins or uncle or aunt. I felt like a guest even though I was treated like family. Being quiet was my way of showing respect for their space. I sat there working, feeling my eyes get heavier with every minute. Eventually, I felt that uncomfortable pressure in my lower stomach telling me I had to pee. I ignored it for a while, trying to finish one last paragraph of what I was writing, but the feeling only got stronger. I didn't want to get up. I was comfortable in my chair, wrapped up in my blanket with the cold air of the room brushing across my face and hands. But eventually, I couldn't hold it anymore, so I stood up, stretched a little, and quietly opened my bedroom door. The hallway outside was pitch dark. No night lights, no open windows letting moonlight in, nothing. Just pure darkness like thick black velvet pressed up against my eyes. But I wasn't worried about it. I knew the way to the bathroom without needing to see. I had walked this exact route hundreds of times over the years, especially at night when I didn't want to disturb anyone. I stepped out into the darkness, letting the door close softly behind me with a click that sounded way too loud. I paused, listening to see if anyone had woken up. There was nothing, just silence. So I took a few steps forward, feeling the carpet under my feet. My toes brushed against the edge where the carpet met the hallway tiles, so I turned left, feeling my way with one hand against the wall. I took a few steps forward, then turned left again, into the short hallway that led to the bathroom. My fingers slid along the smooth paint of the walls, feeling for the doorframe. When I felt the wooden edge of the bathroom door, I pushed it open and reached in to turn on the light. The sudden brightness hurt my eyes, making me squint until everything stopped looking like blobs of white and yellow. The bathroom looked exactly the same as always. Small sink with a toothbrush holder, mirror cabinet above it, toilet facing the door, blue and white tiles on the floor. It smelled faintly of soap and leftover moisture from showers earlier in the evening. I closed the door softly behind me and did my business, feeling relieved as the pressure in my stomach faded away. I washed my hands, staring at my tired reflection in the mirror for a second. My eyes looked puffy and red from staring at the screen for so long. My hair was a mess. I splashed a bit of cold water on my face to wake myself up, then dried it on the small hand towel hanging next to the sink. Turning off the bathroom light, I opened the door into the darkness again. The sudden blackness felt even deeper now after being in the light for a minute. I stood there, blinking into the dark, waiting for my eyes to adjust. They didn't really adjust. It was too dark to see anything at all. I knew I had to get back to my room without turning on any lights, so I felt my way along the walls like I always did. I took a few careful steps forward, feeling the tiles cold under my feet, then turned right. My hands skimmed along the edge of the wall as I walked a few more steps, feeling confident about where I was. I reached what I thought was the end of the short hallway, so I turned right again, expecting to be in the small area just before my bedroom door. But then, as I stepped forward into that last stretch towards my door, I felt my heart freeze. Out of the corner of my eye, even though I could barely see anything at all, I thought I saw something move. Just a dark, shifting shadow against the deeper black around it. It didn't make any sense. I stopped dead where I was, straining my ears to listen for any sounds. Nothing. The house was completely silent. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing, which suddenly felt way too loud in the quiet darkness. I stood there, not moving, my hand still pressed lightly against the wall. I told myself it was just my imagination, just a trick of my eyes, used to the light and now blind in the dark. I took another slow, careful step forward, feeling the carpet brush against my toes again. I reached out my free hand, trying to find my doorknob, but then I saw it again, that shadowy figure, darker than the rest of the darkness, moving towards me from the area where my door was. It didn't make any sound, it just moved silently, coming closer, and I felt an icy chill go down my spine. I froze again, my whole body stiff with fear. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it thumping against my ribs. I felt panic bubbling up inside me, filling up my chest and throat like I was about to choke on it. I had no idea what I was seeing, but it was the creepiest thing I had ever felt since I was a kid having nightmares about my dad trying to hurt me. I felt like a little kid again in that moment, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I stood there, unable to move, feeling like my legs were made of stone. I thought about turning on my phone flashlight, but it was in my room charging. I thought about calling out for someone to come help me, but my throat felt tight, and I didn't want to wake anyone up if this was just me being stupid in the dark. I took another tiny step forward, my hand reaching out blindly, and the shadow moved again, towards me, growing bigger and darker, right in front of my face. It was so close I could feel my body reacting, goosebumps rising all over my arms and neck. My fingers brushed against something cold and hard and smooth. My heart felt like it stopped for a second. I flinched back, my mind screaming at me to run, but then I paused. I moved my hand slowly across the surface in front of me, and suddenly, it all made sense. My fingertips slid across cold glass. I leaned forward just a little, and my nose bumped lightly against it too. That's when I realized I wasn't in front of my door at all. I had completely missed my second right turn in the dark. I was standing right in front of the large mirror that hangs on the hallway wall next to my door at a 90-degree angle. The shadowy figure moving towards me was just my own reflection, barely visible in the pitch black, only moving because I was moving. Every time I took a step, the darkness seemed to shift, and in my fear-soaked brain, it had turned into some terrifying shadow creature coming to get me. I stood there for a minute, letting my heart calm down, feeling stupid and relieved at the same time. My legs felt weak, like they might give out under me, but I managed to turn and find the correct way back to my room. My hand shook as I reached out and finally felt the familiar doorknob. I opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it softly behind me. I stood there in the dim glow of my computer screen, breathing hard, feeling my whole body trembling slightly from the adrenaline. I sat back down in my chair, wrapped my blanket tight around my shoulders, and just sat there for a while, staring at the screen, letting the fear fade away. The room felt warm and safe again, and I couldn't believe how scared I had been of my own reflection. After a few minutes, I shook my head, feeling embarrassed even though no one would ever know what happened. I took a few deep breaths, clicked back into my document, and started typing again, trying to push the fear out of my mind. But every time I looked up at the dark corners of my room, I still felt a small shiver crawl up my spine, thinking about how real that shadow had felt, and how for a few minutes, I truly believed something in the dark was coming for me. It made me realize how easy it is to scare yourself, and how powerful your own mind can be in the dark. When I was about 8 years old, I used to think of school as a safe place. I thought nothing really bad could ever happen there. My school was small, just a long single-story building with brown bricks, and it always smelled like old paper and pencil shavings. I remember that day so clearly, as if it was stamped into my head forever. It was a cold day, even though the sun was out. I remember that because my fingers felt numb when I held onto the metal bars of the playground set earlier that morning. Recess was always the best part of school. The teachers would line us up, lead us out the back doors, and we would all burst free like animals that had been locked up too long, running to the swings, slides, or just the grass to play tag. But that day was different. I was just walking near the fence, dragging the tip of my shoe across the dirt, and watching a few kids play foursquare, when I heard a bunch of kids shouting behind me. Their voices were shaky and serious, not like the normal yelling and laughing that we always heard during recess. I turned around and saw a group of kids gathered near the old storage room door. That storage room was at the very edge of the playground, attached to the main building, right under the roof's edge where black mold stains streaked down the bricks. I never really paid attention to that door before. It was gray with chipped paint and had an old brass handle and a rusty keyhole right under it. When I walked closer, I saw kids whispering to each other, pointing at the door, and some were looking pale like they had seen something terrible. A couple kids were telling others not to look. One boy was holding his hands up in front of another kid's face, telling him to stay away from the keyhole. His hands were shaking. I didn't understand what they were so scared about. I heard them saying something about an eyeball in there. I thought maybe they were playing a game or trying to scare the little kids. But when I saw their faces, I knew they weren't joking. One girl's lips were trembling, and her skin looked almost gray in the winter light. She wasn't even blinking as she stared at the door. I felt this nervous excitement in my chest. I wanted to see what they were seeing. I wanted to know what could make them so scared like that. I asked one kid what they saw, but he just shook his head and backed away from the door, eyes wide and scared. My curiosity was stronger than my fear. I walked right up to the door and stood in front of the keyhole. My heart was beating hard in my chest. I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. I bent down slowly, feeling the cold metal of the doorknob brush against my cheek as I moved my eye closer to the keyhole. At first, I didn't see anything, just darkness with a small patch of light. Then suddenly, right in the middle of that tiny circle of vision, there it was. An eyeball. Big, round, white with little red veins, and the pupil staring straight back at me. It wasn't blinking. It wasn't moving. It was just there, staring into my eye like it was seeing everything inside of me. My whole body froze. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe for a second. Then this wave of cold fear swept over me, starting from my stomach and crawling all the way to my shoulders and neck. My knees felt weak. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. All I knew was that there was an eyeball on the other side of that door, and it was staring at me like it knew I was there before I even bent down. My bladder let go at that moment. Warm pee soaked through my underwear and down my legs, spreading into my socks and pooling in my shoes. I felt so ashamed. Tears started coming out of my eyes, but I couldn't stop staring. I finally jerked back, hitting my head on the metal doorknob, and stumbled backwards onto the hard ground. I felt small pieces of gravel dig into my palms as I caught myself. The kids around me backed away, covering their mouths, staring at the wet stain spreading down my blue jeans. Some of them looked at me with pity, but most of them just looked more scared because they saw how badly it scared me. A teacher's aide came running over, looking panicked, asking what was going on, but I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, shaking and staring at the ground, feeling the warmth of the pee fade into coldness against my skin. They took me to the nurse's office after that. I remember walking through the halls with my head down, trying not to see anyone's eyes. I could hear some kids whispering and giggling as I passed, and each laugh felt like a sharp little knife in my chest. The nurse was kind. She gave me a pair of old gray sweatpants from the lost and found and told me to change in the little bathroom attached to her office. I took off my wet clothes, feeling the cold air bite at my damp skin, and changed into those sweatpants. They smelled like dust and old wood chips from the playground. She gave me a cup of water and told me to lie down on the cot for a while. I closed my eyes, but all I could see was that eyeball staring at me. It felt like it had burned itself into my mind forever. After a while, I heard voices outside the nurse's office. I heard the principal's low voice and then the janitor's voice, deeper and rougher, like he smoked a lot. They were talking about the kids making a scene outside the storage room. I stayed on the cot, staring up at the ceiling tiles that had little brown water stains on them, listening to their muffled words. Then I heard footsteps going down the hall, slow and heavy. The janitor was walking to the storage room. Later, when I was sent back to class after lunch, everything felt quiet and strange. Kids looked at me, but didn't say anything. My own friends were avoiding my eyes. When recess came again that day, I didn't even want to go outside, but the teacher made everyone go. I stood near the fence again, kicking at the dirt, trying to ignore the whispers. Then I heard a group of kids talking louder near the storage room. I looked over and saw the janitor coming out of the storage room holding something in his hands. It was a big square mirror with brown edges. The teachers were asking him questions. He just shook his head and said something I couldn't hear, but the kids around him were starting to laugh. Some were looking embarrassed. I walked closer to listen. One girl was explaining to another that the eyeball we all saw wasn't real. It was just our own eyes reflecting back at us. The janitor found the mirror leaning up against the inside of the door, facing the keyhole perfectly. Anyone who looked through the hole would see their own eye looking back at them. It felt like something heavy dropped in my stomach. I felt stupid. My face burned hot with embarrassment. All that fear, all that panic, the wet stain on my pants, it was just my own eye. For the rest of the day, I kept thinking about how real it felt in that moment. How my body had frozen up with terror seeing that eyeball staring back. It didn't matter that it was just my own reflection. My fear had been real. It showed me how easily my mind could believe something scary, how my body could react without even thinking. I felt small and weak, sitting in my classroom seat with the gray sweatpants bunching up around my ankles, staring at my textbook, but not reading the words. When the final bell rang, I walked home alone. The sky was turning a soft orange color, and the air smelled like grass and warm concrete. I kept my head down the whole way home. I didn't want anyone to see my face or ask me what happened at school. I walked past neighbors mowing their lawns, past a house where a dog barked at me from behind a chain-link fence, past kids riding their bikes down the street. Everything felt normal outside, but inside, I still felt that cold, tight fear in my chest. When I got home, I took off the sweatpants right away and shoved them into the bottom of my laundry basket so no one would ask me why I had them on. I put on my favorite pajama pants and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. I thought about how sometimes the things we see aren't real, but our fear is always real. Even if it's a mirror, even if it's just ourselves, our bodies don't know the difference in that moment. That day taught me something I would never forget. Sometimes the scariest thing staring back at you is yourself, and that is the realest thing of all. When I was a kid, I lived in this small apartment with my mom. It wasn't anything fancy, just a two-bedroom place on the third floor of a long, rectangular building that smelled like old paint, cigarettes, and dust in the hallways. Our door was the chipped beige color with the number 307 nailed crooked on the front. The carpets in the halls were brown with weird red floral designs that never looked clean, no matter how many times the janitor vacuumed them. I remember it always felt colder near the stairwells, like the walls were thin there or something, and the lights flickered with that buzzing hum you get in cheap buildings. My mom worked a lot. She had 2 jobs back then, one at a bakery and another cleaning offices after they closed. I spent most afternoons alone after school until she came home around 6. She was always tired, her hair smelling like flour or chemicals depending on which job she was coming from. But she always tried to be nice to people, even if she barely had energy left for herself. That's probably why she became friends with the woman who lived downstairs. Her name was Melissa. At least that's what everyone called her. She was probably in her late 30s or early 40s, with curly dark hair that was going gray at the roots. She was short and always wore big sweaters, even in summer, like she was trying to hide herself inside them. I didn't know much about her except that she lived alone and hardly ever went out. Sometimes I saw her sitting on the steps outside, smoking, staring at the parking lot like she was watching a movie no one else could see. One morning my mom ran into her in the hallway when we were coming back from grocery shopping. I remember I was holding a bag of potatoes and the handle was cutting into my fingers. My mom stopped to say hi to her, asking how she was doing, and she started crying right there in front of us. Just quiet tears sliding down her face. My mom put the groceries down and hugged her. I remember standing there with the bag digging into my hands, looking at the stains on the hallway carpet while they talked in soft voices. After that, Melissa started coming up to our apartment. My mom would invite her for coffee or tea, sometimes even dinner if she made extra. She always told me to say hi and be polite, but I didn't know what to say to her. She never really looked at me when she was there. She just sat at our small kitchen table, holding the mug in both hands, staring down into it like she was reading something at the bottom. Some days I would sit in the living room doing my homework while they talked. My mom would ask her questions about her day or her work, but Melissa didn't work. She used to work at a store but quit when her girlfriend moved in with her. Then her girlfriend left, and she just stopped leaving the apartment. My mom tried to tell her to go for walks, get fresh air, but Melissa only nodded and said she was fine. I remember how small her voice was, almost like a whisper, even when she was talking normally. Weeks went by like that. Sometimes she would come up every other day, sometimes not for a few days. Then one week she didn't come up at all. I didn't think much of it, but my mom seemed worried. She kept saying she should check on her, but she was working extra shifts and didn't have time. Finally, on her day off, she told me we were going downstairs to see if Melissa was okay. It was late morning, I remember, because the sun was shining through the hallway windows in those bright beams that showed all the dust floating in the air. My mom knocked on her door, holding a little container of leftover pasta she had made the night before. There was no answer. She knocked again, harder this time, and called her name. Still nothing. She tried the doorknob, probably just to see if it was locked, but when she touched it, the door moved. It creaked open so slow, the hinges squealing. It felt like we were in a movie. I was standing behind my mom, looking past her into the dark apartment. The curtains were closed, and it smelled like old garbage mixed with something I couldn't place at first. Something sharp and rotten that made my stomach twist. My mom called her name again, softly this time, like she was scared of what would answer. When nothing did, she stepped inside. I didn't want to go in, but I didn't want to stand alone in the hallway either. So I followed her. The apartment was messy. Plates with dried food on the coffee table, empty bottles of soda, clothes on the floor. I remember seeing a pack of cigarettes on the armrest of her couch with ash spilling onto the cushion. The smell got worse as we moved further in. I could hear the buzzing of flies somewhere, a constant humming that made the hairs on my arms stand up. My mom walked towards the bathroom. The door was open just a crack, and the light was off. She pushed it open slowly. The smell hit me so hard I gagged. My mom gasped and covered her mouth. I couldn't see much at first because my eyes were watering, but when I blinked the tears away, I saw Melissa in the bathtub. She was lying in the tub with her head tilted back against the edge. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and there was dried blood all over her arms and the sides of the tub. The water was dark and thick-looking. I didn't know water could look like that. There were razors on the edge of the tub. The flies were everywhere, landing on her face, crawling on the tile walls, buzzing around the room. The smell was so strong I felt like I was going to throw up right there on the bathroom floor. My mom started crying quietly. She backed out of the bathroom and grabbed my hand, pulling me away. We walked out of that apartment so fast I barely remember it. The hallway felt too bright when we stepped back into it. My mom called the police from our apartment. I sat on the couch while she talked to them, staring at the floor, my ears ringing with the sound of those flies. When the police came, they asked some questions, then told us to stay upstairs. Later I saw them wheeling out a black bag on a stretcher. Her apartment door stayed open for hours while they worked inside. I kept thinking about how she was always so quiet, how she never really looked at me, how she stared into her coffee like she was lost in it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of cars outside, the hum of our old fridge in the kitchen, my mom crying softly in her room. She came to check on me at some point. I remember she sat on the edge of my bed and stroked my hair. She told me not to be scared, that Melissa was our friend, so she wouldn't haunt us. I didn't say anything. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how cold her skin looked in that tub, thinking about the flies crawling on her face, thinking about how lonely she must have felt, sitting there for days while no one knew. After that, things felt different in the building. People whispered in the hallways. They cleaned out her apartment, and new people moved in after a while, but I never forgot what we saw that day. I couldn't walk past her door without feeling that smell crawl back up into my nose. Couldn't look at bathtubs the same way again. I started checking on people more after that. Even as a kid, I'd knock on my friends' doors if I hadn't seen them for a few days. I didn't want to find anyone like that ever again. I didn't want to feel that smell in my throat or see that emptiness in their eyes. Years later, when we moved out of that apartment, I remember looking back at the building as we packed the last boxes into the truck. The windows all looked the same, blank and silent, but I remembered exactly which one was hers. For a moment I thought I saw her sitting by the window, looking out at us with that sad, quiet face. But I blinked and there was nothing there. Just dusty glass reflecting the gray sky. We drove away and I didn't look back again. But even now, sometimes when I'm sitting in a bathtub and close my eyes, I see her there. Not as a ghost, not floating or whispering in the dark, just lying there in that water, alone and silent, the smell of blood and rot filling the air. And I think about how loneliness can kill a person just as surely as anything else, how silence can be the heaviest thing in a room, how you can live right above someone and never really know them until it's too late. My wife and I decided to take a short spring holiday this year, just to get away from work, routine, and everything else that was draining us. We booked a small rental property in Bath, UK. It was a quaint little place, nothing fancy, just a stone cottage with a single bedroom on the ground floor, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a living area with an old wooden floor that creaked when you walked on it barefoot. Outside, there was a tiny gravel walkway leading to a black iron gate that opened onto the narrow street. The cottage sat attached to a row of similar rentals, and at the end of the row was a small park. The street itself was quiet, lined with parked cars and old street lamps that cast yellow light at night. During the day, Bath was alive with tourists and students, but at night it felt like everyone went home and the streets emptied out. I liked that. I liked the quiet. I liked the feeling of being away from everything familiar. But looking back now, I realize that silence can be its own kind of horror. We arrived there on a Wednesday afternoon. I still remember the smell of damp stone as we opened the old wooden door. The place was cold when we first stepped inside, the kind of cold that clings to stone walls. My wife dropped her bag by the couch, and immediately went to open the small kitchen window to let in fresh air. I carried our 2 suitcases to the bedroom, which was just off the living room down a tiny hallway with an uneven floor that dipped in the middle. The bedroom was small, just wide enough to fit a double bed, 2 small nightstands, and a narrow wardrobe against the far wall. The window was only a foot above ground level, looking straight out at the gravel walkway and the gate. The first time I saw how close it was to the walkway, I thought to myself that if someone walked by at night, they could probably hear us breathing inside. We spent the rest of that day walking around Bath. We went to a small cafe near Pulteney Bridge and had cappuccinos and shortbread biscuits. We wandered through old bookshops and stopped by the grocery store to get food for dinner. As the sun set, the temperature dropped even further, and we hurried back to the cottage, carrying a bag of groceries, a bottle of wine, and a loaf of fresh sourdough bread wrapped in brown paper. I cooked pasta while she set up her laptop on the table to watch a show later. We ate dinner quietly, the sound of our cutlery against the ceramic plates filling the room. After dinner, we sat on the couch and watched 2 episodes of the show before deciding to go to bed. We were both exhausted from walking all day. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and crawled under the thick duvet, feeling its heavy weight pressed down on me. The room was so cold I could see my breath when I exhaled. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was dark in the room, except for a sliver of yellow light coming in through the edge of the curtain from the street lamp outside. My wife was asleep, her breathing slow and calm. I was lying on my left side facing the window, half awake and half drifting back to sleep, when I heard it. First it was the sound of metal scraping lightly. It was so faint I thought it might be part of a dream. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. The sound of the gate latch lifting, and then the gate itself opening slowly with a quiet squeak, as if someone was trying to make it move without any noise. My eyes snapped open. My heart began to beat so hard I could feel it pulsing in my neck. I lay there completely still, listening. The gate closed softly. Not slammed, not even pushed shut. Just softly, like someone easing it closed to avoid making any noise. Every single hair on my arms and neck stood on end. The room felt even colder than before. I strained my ears, listening for anything. I heard nothing for a few seconds, and then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel. Slow, careful footsteps, like someone was trying to move without being heard. But gravel betrays every step. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. It was right outside our window. I held my breath, listening for each step. The motion sensor light clicked on with a faint electrical buzz. It lit up the walkway, casting a bright white glow through the thin curtain. I saw a shadow move across the curtain, fast and sudden, like whoever it was had darted out of the light beam. I didn't even think. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I threw the duvet off me and swung my feet onto the cold wooden floor. I could hear my wife stirring behind me, half asleep and mumbling something, but I didn't focus on her. I walked out of the bedroom and into the dark kitchen. My eyes adjusted fast. The moonlight coming through the small kitchen window lit up the countertops enough for me to see the knife block by the sink. I grabbed the largest knife, gripping it so hard my knuckles went white. My heart was pounding so loud I felt dizzy for a moment. But I held onto the counter, closed my eyes, and took a deep, silent breath. I walked to the front door and stood with my back against the wall next to it. The cottage was silent. I could hear the old clock ticking in the living room. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and fast. I waited there for what felt like 10 minutes, but it was probably just 1 or 2. The motion light outside clicked off, and darkness returned. I listened for footsteps, for any sound at all. But there was nothing, just silence. Deep, suffocating silence. Then suddenly, the silence broke with the loud sound of someone running fast on the gravel. The footsteps were frantic, crunching louder and louder as they reached the gate. I heard the gate being thrown open so hard it hit the stone wall beside it with a metallic bang. Then it slammed shut again. I could hear the footsteps fading down the street. They ran and ran until I couldn't hear them anymore. I stood there frozen, the knife still clutched in my hand. My breathing was ragged, my chest heaving with each breath. I felt a drop of sweat run down my back. The cold air felt even colder against my wet skin. My wife came out of the bedroom then. She was pale, her hair messy from sleep. She told me that she had seen the shadow outside our window too, right when the motion light turned on. She said the person had just stood there for a second before ducking away from the light. And when the light turned off again, she heard them running away. We stayed awake the rest of the night. I sat in the living room, staring at the front door with the knife resting on my lap, while my wife made us cups of tea with shaking hands. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence said everything. The realization that someone had walked right up to our window in the middle of the night while we slept left a sour taste in my mouth. I kept thinking about what could have happened if the light hadn't turned on, if the person had decided to break the window, if they had tried the front door, if I hadn't woken up at the exact moment I did. The rest of the trip felt uneasy. Every night after that, I propped a chair against the front door and kept the knife by my side of the bed. Every sound outside made me flinch awake. I kept picturing the shadow against the window curtain, the quick movement, the silence afterwards. It stayed in my mind like a stain I couldn't scrub out. On the morning we left, I walked outside to put our bags in the car. I stood for a moment by the gate, looking at the gravel walkway, at the street beyond it, at the neighboring cottages. Everything looked so normal in daylight. Birds were singing. A woman across the street was watering her flower boxes. A man walked his dog past me, nodding good morning. But all I could think about was the person who came in the dark. The way they moved so silently, the way they tried to hide, the way they ran when they realized they'd been seen. I kept thinking about their intentions, what they wanted, why they came to our window, what they would have done if I hadn't gotten up. That day we drove back home in silence for the first half of the journey. My wife dozed off against the passenger window while I drove down the winding roads out of Bath. I kept replaying everything in my head. I still do sometimes. Even now, sitting at my desk, thinking about that night makes my arms prickle with goosebumps. I never saw their face. I never heard their voice. I don't know what they were planning to do, but I do know that I almost stabbed someone that night. I was ready to, completely ready. And that thought sits in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold. Because whoever that person was, they weren't supposed to be there. And I wasn't supposed to be standing in a dark kitchen with a knife in my hand, waiting for a stranger to come through my door. But that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. And no matter how far away I am from that cottage now, no matter how many months go by, I still feel that cold night air on my skin. I still see that shadow move against the curtain. I still hear the gravel crunching under silent footsteps. And I still grip the knife in my mind, ready to protect the woman I love, knowing that sometimes the real monsters in this world walk on 2 feet, just like you and me. I was outside playing with my friends one afternoon. The air was warm but not too hot, just that perfect quiet day feeling when you don't have any worries and you're just out with your friends running around. We were all about 9 or 10 years old. My friends lived in a small neighborhood with a few houses spread out down the road, not like a busy town street. There were open yards, some trees, and the road ran straight with small dips and rises. Their front yard was pretty big, with short grass and a wide driveway that curved up from the road to the garage. We had been playing tag at first, running back and forth across the yard, breathing hard, laughing, feeling that burn in your chest that actually feels good when you're a kid. Then we sat down on the edge of the driveway, sweating, catching our breath, pulling out grass to throw at each other. That's when I noticed the sound of a truck driving by. It was an old truck, not too loud but still had that deep engine hum. I didn't think anything about it at first. Trucks came down that road sometimes. It was normal, but then it came by again a few minutes later. The same truck, moving a little slower this time. I didn't really pay attention to the driver the first time, but now as it rolled past, I could see a man behind the wheel. He had a big dark hat on, like a baseball cap pulled down low over his forehead. I couldn't really see his face clearly, but I felt him looking at us as he passed. His truck rolled by almost in slow motion, tires crunching on the little bits of gravel that lined the edge of the road. As soon as he was past, we just went back to talking and flicking grass at each other. Then he came by again. This time it felt weird. I felt it in my stomach before I really noticed anything. The truck moved even slower. The man's window was down. He had his arm out holding something. At first I thought maybe it was a phone, but it was bigger and shaped different. I squinted at it. It was one of those old handheld recorders, the kind with the little flip-out screens. My heart felt like it stopped. I saw it clearly. He was pointing it at us, moving it slightly, as if filming each of us sitting there. He drove past and disappeared around the bend in the road. We all just sat there for a few seconds, not really talking. My chest felt tight, and I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. Then one of my friends whispered that he was recording us. Another said we should go inside. None of us wanted to keep playing outside after that. We scrambled up, ran up the driveway, opened the door, and went inside their house. My friend's mom was in the kitchen. We tried to explain what happened. My heart was beating so hard I felt like it was shaking my whole chest. She looked at us and told my friends they had to stay inside for the rest of the afternoon. Then she looked at me and said I should go home. I remember feeling so confused and scared at that moment. My mom wasn't home. She worked at a small store in town and wasn't going to be home for another hour or two. I told my friend's mom that my mom wasn't home right now, that I couldn't go back alone, but she didn't really care. She told me I needed to go home. Maybe she didn't want the responsibility, or maybe she just didn't think it was that serious. But to me, it felt so serious. It felt terrifying. So I walked outside, down their steps, out into the warm afternoon air again. The sunlight felt like it was burning my skin now, not warm and comforting like before. I kept looking down the road to see if the truck was coming back. Their house was almost halfway between my house and the small grocery store where my mom worked. The road had no sidewalks, just grass and dirt on the sides. My house was almost 2 miles down, with a few small dips and bends. It felt like the longest road in the world right then. I started walking fast, then I just started running. I ran with my backpack bouncing against my back, my shoes slamming into the ground. I kept looking behind me over and over. Every few steps I'd glance back. I could almost feel that truck coming up behind me, rolling up slowly, that man pointing his camera out at me, then grabbing me and pulling me inside. I felt tears stinging my eyes, but I forced myself not to cry. I just ran faster. The road felt so long. My legs were already tired from playing outside, but I pushed them to keep going. My breath came out ragged. My throat burned. The air felt hotter and heavier with every step. Sweat was dripping down my back. I could hear nothing but my own breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. My chest hurt, but I didn't stop. Every time I thought about slowing down, I pictured that truck coming around the bend behind me, and it made my feet move faster. I ran past empty driveways, past mailboxes, past yards with silent houses, past trash cans lined up at the edge of driveways. It felt like the whole world was empty except for me, and that man somewhere on the road behind me. I could almost hear the crunch of his tires, even though there was nothing there. My legs were burning and shaking by the time I got to my house. I could see the mailbox with our family name on it. I sprinted up the driveway, almost falling when I hit the step to the porch. My hands were shaking as I pulled the spare key from under the flower pot. I unlocked the door and slammed it behind me. I locked it, then locked the top bolt too. I was breathing so hard I thought I was going to throw up. The house was silent. The curtains were closed. The kitchen was dark except for the little clock glowing on the stove. I walked through each room and peeked out every window to make sure the truck wasn't outside. I kept the lights off and went to sit in the corner of the living room, curling my knees up to my chest. My heart was still pounding so fast it felt like it would burst out of me. I stayed there for what felt like forever, listening to every tiny noise the house made. The sound of the fridge humming, the wood creaking, the clock ticking. Every noise made me jump. Eventually my breathing calmed down. My chest still hurt from running so far, but my legs felt like jelly. I kept thinking about that man. Why was he recording us? What was he doing? Did he live nearby, or was he just driving through? Was he planning to come back for me after seeing me leave alone? All those questions made my stomach twist. I felt so alone in that house, like the walls weren't strong enough to keep someone out if they really wanted to get in. When my mom finally came home, the sun was lower in the sky, shining through the front window with that orange glow that happens in the late afternoon. I didn't even wait for her to take off her shoes. I told her everything in a shaky voice. I watched her face change from confusion to anger as I spoke. She was so mad that my friend's mom hadn't let me stay there. She kept saying she should have called her. She should have let me stay until she could come pick me up. I could hear the anger in her voice, but I could see the fear too, the same fear I had felt running down that road alone. That evening she called the sheriff's office and told them what happened. An officer came by to talk to us, and he said they would send a patrol down that road to keep an eye out. I remember watching his car drive away down the same road I had run earlier, the red taillights glowing as he disappeared around the bend. For the first time that day, I felt a little bit safe again, just knowing someone was out there looking for that man. For days after that, I kept thinking I saw the truck parked somewhere, in a driveway or along the edge of the road waiting. Every time I saw a similar truck, my stomach would clench and my legs would feel weak. Even weeks later, I would dream about running down that road with the sun burning hot against my back, hearing the engine behind me, my legs not moving fast enough, feeling like I was going to get pulled off the road at any second. I started refusing to walk home from anywhere alone. I would wait for my mom or dad or older brother to come get me. Even now, years later, whenever I see an old truck driving slowly past a yard with kids playing, my chest gets tight and I remember that day, running with everything I had to get home before he could catch me. That day changed how I saw the world. Before that, the road was just a road. The trees were just trees. The trucks were just trucks. But after that, I realized there are people out there who watch and follow and plan, and you never really know when they're going to show up. It was the first time I felt true fear, the kind that burns into your memory forever. Even though nothing happened physically to me that day, it felt like something was taken from me. The comfort of walking home in the sun, the simple fun of playing in the front yard with friends without wondering who might be watching. That innocence was gone after that. I never really got it back. And I think about that every time I see kids playing near the road, hoping they never feel the need to run home with their hearts pounding and tears burning their eyes like I did that day. I woke up that morning feeling tired, even though I had slept for almost 8 hours. The sun was already rising, and light came through the thin curtains of my bedroom. I sat up on my mattress, rubbed my eyes, and listened to the quietness of my small apartment. My head felt heavy because I had stayed up late scrolling on my phone, reading about outdoor survival stories and people getting lost in the wild. I didn't have work that day, so I planned to hike to clear my head. I lived close to a large forest reserve. It was only about a 20-minute drive away, and it always felt good to go there, away from the noise of the town and cars and people. I made coffee in the small kitchen, drank it while staring at the fridge covered in old magnets and 1 or 2 unpaid bills stuck under them. I ignored the bills for now and grabbed my small hiking bag. I packed 2 bottles of water, a chocolate bar, a small first aid kit, and my old folding knife. I didn't plan to stay long, just a few hours of walking, maybe sit on a rock and look at the trees. I put on my gray hoodie because the morning air was chilly, my worn-out jeans, and my thick hiking boots. I locked my door and went downstairs. The building was quiet because most people had already left for work. I started my car, an old white Corolla that smelled of dust and stale perfume. I drove with the windows open because the air felt fresh and cold. On the way to the forest, I passed a row of small shops opening up, and a dog ran across the road, making me slow down. After 20 minutes, I turned off the main road onto the narrow gravel path that led to the forest reserve parking area. There was no gate, just an old wooden sign with the name of the forest and a list of safety instructions. I parked on the side under a big oak tree. No other cars were there. I felt glad because I liked being alone when I hiked. I got out, stretched my arms, adjusted my bag, and started walking down the trail. The trail was muddy from rain a few days ago, so my boots made sucking sounds as I walked. Birds chirped from high up in the trees, and I saw squirrels darting across the path to hide in bushes. The forest felt alive with insects buzzing and the smell of damp leaves and soil. I kept walking for about an hour, taking turns randomly because I knew these trails well. They were not complicated, and the paths connected in loops, leading back to the parking area. After a while, I started feeling hungry, so I stopped by a large fallen tree. It was covered in green moss, and the wood under the bark was dark and damp. I sat on it, took out my chocolate bar, and ate half of it while looking around at the thick trees. Sunlight came through in scattered beams, lighting up small patches on the ground. I finished eating, drank some water, and kept walking further away from the main trail. I wanted to explore a part one hadn't seen for a while. There was an old hunting cabin deep in the forest. I had only seen it once, about a year ago, when a friend showed it to me. The cabin wasn't used anymore, just a small wooden structure with broken windows and rotting steps. I kept walking towards where I remembered the cabin to be. The ground became uneven, with tree roots sticking out like veins. I had to watch where I stepped because I didn't want to twist my ankle. I walked for another 30 minutes, checking my phone's GPS map, but the signal was weak here. I didn't care because I felt confident I knew my way back. The trees became denser, and there was less undergrowth. The smell of damp wood grew stronger. Soon, I saw the cabin ahead, hidden among tall pines. Its roof was caved in on one side, and the wooden walls were dark and damp from years of rain. I stood a few feet away, staring at it. I decided to walk around it before going inside. On the back side of the cabin, I saw something strange. There was a deep hole in the ground, about 2 feet wide. It looked freshly dug. The dirt was piled next to it, and the edges were sharp and clean. I crouched down to look at it closely. It was at least 4 feet deep. I felt my chest tighten a bit. Who would dig a hole here, in the middle of nowhere? I stood up and looked around. The forest was silent now, except for the distant caw of a crow. A feeling of unease started creeping up my spine. I walked to the cabin steps. The wood cracked under my boots. The door was half broken, hanging off one hinge. I pushed it open gently and stepped inside. The air smelled of wet wood and mold. There was an old chair lying on its side, and a small metal stove rusted almost completely through. On the far wall, there was graffiti sprayed in red paint, but I couldn't read what it said because the wood was peeling off. The floor felt soft in places. I didn't want to stand there long, so I stepped back out and stood on the grass. I looked at the hole again. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't old, and the dirt was moist and freshly dug up. My mind started thinking of all sorts of things. Maybe a hunter buried something here. Maybe it was for trash, or maybe something worse. I felt cold even though the sun was out. I turned away and decided to head back to the main trail. I didn't want to be near that cabin anymore. As I started walking back, I felt like I heard movement behind me. I stopped and listened, but there was only silence. I shook my head and kept walking faster now. My boots crunched on the fallen leaves and sticks, and I could hear my own breathing getting heavier. After about 10 minutes, I felt calmer and slowed down. I took out my water bottle and drank while standing under a big oak tree with thick, twisted branches. I kept walking for another hour, following the small orange markers nailed to trees. They were old and faded, but I could still see them. My legs started to feel tired. I thought about getting home, taking a long shower, and cooking rice with chicken for lunch. I felt my stomach rumble at the thought. Soon, I reached the wide part of the trail that I knew led back to the parking area. I felt relief wash over me. I walked down it, and after 20 minutes, I saw my white Corolla parked alone under the oak tree. The sun was higher now, and the day felt warmer. I reached my car, put my bag in the back seat, and sat down in the driver's seat. I took a moment to just sit there, looking at the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. I felt my heartbeat slowly returning to normal. I started the car and drove out of the forest reserve, turning back onto the main road. On the drive home, my mind kept thinking about that hole behind the cabin. I felt uneasy. Something about it gnawed at my thoughts. When I reached my apartment, I parked, went upstairs, and sat on my bed for a long time. I felt tense and restless, like I had left something unfinished. After a while, I opened my laptop and searched news for the area around the forest. I didn't find anything at first. But then, after clicking on a small local news site, I saw a headline that made my chest feel cold. Police searching forest reserve after local woman goes missing. It said a woman in her 20s had been reported missing 2 days ago. Her car was found parked near the forest trail. She had gone for a walk and never returned. The search teams had been looking near the main trails, but hadn't found anything yet. I sat there staring at the screen. My stomach felt like a stone. The article showed her picture. She looked happy, wearing a blue beanie and a wide smile. I leaned back in my chair, feeling sick. My mind went back to the freshly dug hole behind the cabin. I knew I should call the police. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking slightly, and called the local police station. They answered, and I told them about the hole I saw. They asked for the exact location. I told them how to reach the cabin from the main trail and described the area as clearly as I could. They said thank you and ended the call. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone screen. My window was open and warm summer air came into the room, but I felt cold. The image of that hole burned into my mind, the clean edges, the dark, damp dirt, and the way it was hidden behind the cabin. I thought about what would have happened if I had decided to dig a bit to see what was inside. I felt sick again. The next day, I checked the news again. There was an update. The missing woman's body had been found buried in a shallow grave near an old hunting cabin in the forest reserve. The police were treating it as a homicide and were asking for anyone with information to come forward. I felt my throat go dry as I read those words. My chest felt heavy, and I felt like crying even though I didn't know her. I thought about how close I was to that grave, standing just a few feet away, looking down into that dark hole without knowing she was there. That whole day, I felt sick to my stomach. I kept thinking, what if the person who did it had still been there while I was walking around? What if they saw me? What if they were watching from the trees when I stepped into the cabin or crouched to look at the hole? I felt cold all day thinking about that. I didn't go hiking for many weeks after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cabin, the hole, and the silent dark forest around me. Slowly, life went back to normal. I still think about her sometimes. I think about how her family must feel and how they will never get over losing her like that. I still go hiking sometimes, but I stay on the main trails. I never wander off to explore hidden places anymore. That day taught me that you never really know what you might find out there, deep in the silent woods, where no one can hear you scream and no one knows you're there. It made me realize that the world is darker than we think, and even on bright sunny mornings, danger can hide in the quietest corners, waiting without a sound. I woke up before my alarm went off. It was still dark outside. I could hear the quiet hum of my small apartment building. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how tired I felt. I hadn't been sleeping well for weeks now. I had a job interview later that day, so I forced myself out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The cold tiles under my feet woke me up a bit more. I poured water into the kettle and turned it on. As I waited for it to boil, I leaned against the counter, feeling a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't shake. After my coffee, I took a quick shower and put on clean clothes. I checked my bag to make sure I had printed my resume. I looked at the clock. I still had an hour before I needed to leave, so I sat on the old brown couch in my living room. It sagged in the middle and smelled like old dust. I sat there staring at the blank TV screen for a while. The apartment was silent, except for the sound of the fridge humming and sometimes clicking. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and walked out into the hallway. It smelled like stale carpet. My neighbor's door was open a crack. I didn't see anyone inside, but their kitchen light was on. I walked down the stairs. The building was built in the 70s and hadn't been updated since then. The walls were yellowed and the wooden railings felt sticky. Outside, the air was already warm, even though the sun was barely up. I walked down the cracked sidewalk, past the small grocery store that always smelled like rotting vegetables. A stray dog walked across the street with its ribs showing. I crossed at the lights and kept walking towards the bus stop. The streets were mostly empty. A man slept under a broken billboard, his blanket covered in dirt. When I got to the bus stop, I sat on the metal bench. My back felt cold against it. The bus arrived after a few minutes, wheezing to a stop in front of me. I stepped on and sat near the middle. The seats were torn in places, showing yellow foam inside. The smell of old sweat and engine oil made my stomach turn. I sat staring out the window as we passed rows of dull buildings, small shops with metal bars over their windows and broken fences. The sun was rising slowly, turning the sky pale orange. After about 40 minutes, I got off near the industrial part of town. This place always felt empty, even though there were big factories and storage buildings everywhere. I walked past long metal fences and huge trucks parked along the road. The interview was in a warehouse office building that rented out workspaces to small companies. I reached the door and went inside. The hallway smelled like old mop water. I found the office and sat down in the waiting area. The interview lasted only 15 minutes. They asked about my last job and told me they'd call me next week. I knew they wouldn't. I could tell from the way they looked at me. I walked out feeling even more tired. I decided to take a longer walk back to the main road to clear my head. I walked behind the warehouses, along a narrow street lined with broken concrete and weeds growing through cracks. There were no other people around, only the distant sound of trucks reversing somewhere far away. As I walked, I noticed a narrow path between two fences. It looked like it led to a field behind the industrial area. I felt like walking somewhere quiet, so I squeezed through the gap. The fence was rusty and cold against my arms. I stepped onto a rough dirt trail that led into the field. There was trash everywhere, broken bottles, old plastic bags, rusted cans half buried in dirt. The field stretched far back towards a thin line of trees. Beyond that, I could see train tracks. I walked slowly, kicking at pebbles. The ground was dry and cracked under my shoes. As I got closer to the trees, I heard the faint sound of a train horn far in the distance. The air felt still and heavy. The trees looked thin and sickly, their leaves covered in a layer of dust. I stepped into the shade of the trees and felt some relief from the sun. The ground here was littered with fallen branches and more trash. There were old mattresses, broken chairs, and pieces of rotting wood scattered around. I kept walking deeper into the trees, following a thin path of flattened grass. I felt an odd sense of calm. The trees blocked out most of the sound from the roads and warehouses. All I could hear was the rustling of dry leaves and my own footsteps. After a while, I came across a small clearing. In the middle of it was an old, burned-out van. Its windows were shattered, and the tires were long gone. The inside was filled with old blankets, plastic bottles, and scraps of metal. It smelled like burned rubber and rot. I walked around it slowly, feeling the dry grass scratch against my ankles. As I stood there, I suddenly felt like I was being watched. The feeling came so fast it made my heart jump. I looked around but saw nothing except the thin trees and the field beyond. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I started to walk back towards the path, but I heard a faint crack behind me. I froze. The air felt like it thickened around me. I turned my head slowly, trying not to make noise. Behind the van, in the shadows, I saw a shape. It was a man. He stood very still, almost hidden by the van. His clothes were dirty and torn. His face was covered in dirt, and his hair was greasy and stuck to his forehead. He was staring at me. My stomach tightened so hard I felt like I was going to be sick. He didn't move, just kept staring. I took a slow step back. He stepped forward, coming out from behind the van. His hands were black with dirt. He had no shoes on, and his feet were caked in mud and dried blood. I turned and started walking quickly back down the path. I didn't run because I didn't want to make it obvious that I was scared. But my heart was hammering so hard I felt like it was shaking my chest. I could hear him walking behind me. His footsteps were heavy and slow, crushing dry leaves under him. I walked faster, almost tripping on a root sticking out of the dirt. The trees seemed to close in tighter around me. I could hear my own breathing getting faster and more shallow. After a minute, I glanced back. He was still there, only a few feet behind me. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and his mouth was slightly open too. His teeth were dark and stained. I felt dizzy with fear. I forced myself to keep walking. I could see the edge of the trees ahead. I just had to get back to the field, then the warehouses, then the road. I kept telling myself that over and over. The footsteps behind me got louder. He was walking faster now, almost matching my speed. When I finally reached the edge of the trees, I broke into a run. The dry grass whipped against my legs as I sprinted across the field. I didn't look back. I could hear him running too, his feet slapping against the ground behind me. I ran as hard as I could, feeling like my lungs were going to burst. I reached the fence and scrambled through the gap, scraping my arms. I fell onto the cracked road on the other side, my palms burning from the rough concrete. I turned around. He was standing on the other side of the fence, staring at me through the gap. His chest was heaving up and down. I could hear his breathing even from where I was. It was ragged and wet sounding. He didn't try to come through the gap. He just stood there, staring at me with those wide, empty eyes. I got up and ran down the road towards the warehouses. My legs felt like they were going to give out, but I kept running until I reached the main road. When I reached the bus stop again, I sat down on the bench, shaking all over. My throat felt tight, and I couldn't catch my breath properly. I looked back down the road, but there was no sign of him. The bus came and I got on. The driver glanced at me, but didn't say anything. I sat at the back, holding my bag tight against my chest. I felt like I was floating, like none of it was real. But my scraped arms and burning palms reminded me it was. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and closed all the curtains. I sat on the floor in my living room, listening to the silence. My ears were ringing from how hard my heart had been beating. I sat there for a long time, staring at the stains on the old carpet. Eventually, my breathing calmed down. The sun moved across the sky and the light changed from pale yellow to orange, then faded into dark blue. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about his eyes, wide and unblinking, and how he hadn't said a single word, just watching me, waiting. I realized later that he must have been living out there in the van or somewhere in those trees, surviving off whatever he could find. Maybe he thought I was trespassing on his space. Or maybe he was just waiting for someone to wander back there alone. The next morning, I packed up my things. I didn't have much. Just clothes, my small TV, and a few dishes. I called my cousin in another city and asked if I could stay with him for a while. He said yes. I left that afternoon and never looked back. I still think about that man sometimes, wondering if he's still out there, waiting behind that old burned-out van, watching the field for anyone else who dares to step into his quiet, hidden world. I think about how close he was to me, how easy it would have been for him to reach out and grab me before I could run. Every time I walk alone now, no matter where I am, I feel that same heaviness in my chest. That same feeling that someone is standing just behind me, staring, waiting for me to notice them. And I always walk a little faster, just in case. I woke up early that morning because my back was hurting from the hard bed in the small motel room I had rented for the night. I was driving across the state for work, and it was cheaper to stop at those old roadside motels than spend money on something fancy. I never cared about comfort anyway. I just needed a place to sleep and a shower before heading out again. I rubbed my eyes and stretched my legs, feeling the stiffness in my knees. I was getting old, or maybe it was just too many days of driving long distances. I washed my face, packed up my bag, and left the room. Outside, the air was cold and damp, and there was still dew on the grass near the parking lot. My car was covered in a thin layer of moisture, and I wiped the windshield with a towel before getting in. I sat in the car for a minute, checking my phone for directions. I had to deliver equipment to a construction site that was deep in the hills, and I knew there wouldn't be any signals there, so I memorized the route carefully before driving off. The sun was coming up slowly behind the hills, making the sky a dull gray instead of black. It was quiet, just the sound of my tires on the empty highway and the occasional bird swooping across the road. I drove for about an hour, passing small farms, empty fields, and thick patches of trees. Eventually, the paved road turned into a dirt path. I slowed down, feeling every bump and rock under my tires. Dust rose behind me as I moved deeper into the hills. The trees grew thicker on both sides, almost like a tunnel, and the road twisted sharply around rocks and dips in the ground. After some time, I came to a place where the trees cleared a little, and there was an old rusted gate that had fallen to one side. The map said to go through there. I looked around, noticing how silent it was. No wind, no birds, no insects buzzing. It felt strange. I drove past the broken gate and continued down the path. Branches scratched against the side of my car, making high screeching noises that set my teeth on edge. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying not to flinch every time it happened. The path went on for what felt like forever. I checked the clock and realized it was almost noon, but the thick trees kept the light dim. I saw no houses or workers, just the road, rocks, fallen logs, and shadows everywhere. The map showed I was close. The site was supposed to be in a clearing near the river. I kept driving, following the turns, feeling the car dip down steep hills and climb back up. I drove slowly because the dirt was soft in places, and I didn't want to get stuck. Finally, the trees thinned out, and I saw the clearing ahead. I stopped the car and turned off the engine. For a moment, it was so silent that I could hear my heart beating in my ears. I stepped out and looked around. There was no construction site. No trucks, no workers, no equipment. Just an empty, wide clearing with tall grass, old tree stumps, and an uneven patch of ground near the river. I frowned, feeling confused. Maybe I took a wrong turn. I took out my phone, but there was no signal. I walked around, scanning the ground for tire tracks or footprints. There was nothing. I felt a cold breeze coming from the river and heard water rushing over rocks. I walked toward it, hoping to see signs of human activity. As I reached the edge, I looked down and saw the water was shallow, moving fast over large, smooth stones. I stood there for a while, feeling uneasy. I had a bad feeling in my stomach, like when you forget something important and only realize it too late. I turned back to my car, planning to drive back to the last junction and see if I missed a turn. As I approached, I stopped. My chest felt tight. There were fresh footprints near my car. They were not mine. They came from the woods on the right side and circled the back of my car, then disappeared into the trees on the left side. They looked like work boots. The dirt was still damp, and the edges of the footprints were sharp, which meant they were fresh, maybe made just minutes ago. I looked around quickly, scanning the tree line, but saw no one. The hairs on my arms stood up. I felt exposed, standing in the open like that. I moved quickly to my car and got in, locking the doors out of habit. I started the engine and turned the car around, pointing back the way I came. As I was about to drive off, I thought I saw movement between the trees ahead, like someone stepping behind a trunk to hide. I pressed my foot down and the car jerked forward, bouncing over the uneven ground as I drove back towards the path. The road seemed narrower on the way back, with branches reaching out like hands to scrape against the car. Dust filled the air behind me, and I could smell the dry dirt mixing with the smell of engine oil and old air freshener. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone running after me, but there was nothing except the trees whipping past. I finally reached the broken gate and drove out onto the main dirt road. I felt a little better, but kept driving fast until I reached a wider road with gravel. I stopped there, my hands trembling slightly on the wheel. I took a few deep breaths and looked at the map again. I still had no signal. I decided to keep driving until I found some houses or another town. I drove for another hour, feeling tense the whole time. Eventually, I saw a small petrol station by the side of the road. It was old, with faded signs and a cracked concrete lot. But there was a car parked near the pump, and I felt relief wash over me. I pulled in and turned off the engine. I went inside and bought a drink, acting normal even though my heart was still pounding. After a few minutes, I asked the old man behind the counter if there was a construction site near the river up in the hills. He looked at me for a moment, then shook his head. He said there hadn't been any construction there for years. The company had pulled out after the ground kept shifting and causing landslides. They had left it abandoned for almost a decade. I felt something cold crawl up my back. I thanked him and walked back to my car. I sat there for a while, staring out at the empty road. I thought about those fresh footprints, circling my car in that quiet clearing. I thought about the way the trees were silent, how no birds or insects made a sound. I felt like I had been watched the entire time. Maybe someone lived out there, away from everyone, hiding in the woods. Maybe they saw my car and came to check who I was. Maybe they didn't want anyone finding them there. I never found out who it was. I never went back to that area. Later that week, my boss told me it was his mistake. He had sent me an old job site location by accident. But every time I think about that day, I see those fresh boot prints circling my car, and I feel the same cold fear in my chest. I think about what would have happened if my car had broken down there, or if I had walked deeper into the woods to find whoever left those prints. I feel grateful that I left when I did. Now, every time I drive through quiet forest roads, I keep my doors locked and my eyes on the trees, just in case someone is watching from the shadows again. I woke up that morning feeling annoyed at myself for sleeping in. I had planned to leave early to hike up the ridge before the heat settled in. It was mid-July, and summers here meant dry wind, loose rocks, and no shade for miles. I lived alone in a small rented trailer on the edge of town, and the hills behind it rose into these long, dusty ridges with animal tracks cutting through the sagebrush. I grabbed my old boots from under the table, tied them tight, filled my water bottle, and left. I didn't bother locking the door. Nobody came out this way. I walked down the dirt driveway, passing the scrubby little tree I always parked under, and crossed the barbed wire fence into the foothills. The first few hundred feet were easy, just dry grass and small rocks, but soon I had to climb over loose shale. Every step made a crunching echo. My legs burned as I went up. I stopped to catch my breath and drank some water, looking back at the valley behind me. My trailer looked small and lonely, sitting in that yellow field under the hard blue sky. I kept going until I reached the ridge line. From there, you could see the next valley, empty except for power lines cutting across it like giant metal insects. The highway was a thin gray line far off, with tiny cars sliding along it. I sat down on a flat rock, pulled off my boots for a second, and rubbed my feet. I remember thinking it was too quiet. Even the grasshoppers weren't making noise. After 10 minutes I stood up, deciding to follow the ridge north for a while before heading down a different path back home. As I walked, I noticed shoe prints in the dust. They were faint but clearly human, heading in the same direction I was going. That was odd. I never saw people up here. It wasn't a hiking area. It was just private ranch land and undeveloped hills. I guessed maybe a ranch hand had come through to check fences. I kept following them, matching my pace with the stride. After about half a mile, the tracks turned downhill toward a shallow draw lined with thicker bushes. I wasn't planning to go down there, but curiosity got me. The slope was steep, and I slipped a few times, sending rocks tumbling. When I reached the bottom, I saw the prints lead straight into the brush. I pushed through, my arms getting scratched by dry twigs, and came out in a small flat clearing hidden from the ridge above. That's when I saw the old tent. It was sun-bleached and ripped on one side, leaning over like it had collapsed long ago. Next to it was a pile of broken camping chairs, an old cooler, and a rusted metal pot. There were cigarette butts scattered around, half buried in dust. It looked abandoned for years. I walked around the site. There was no smell, no sign of animals, just dead silence and a hot wind brushing through the bushes. I pulled back the torn flap of the tent. Inside it was empty except for a rolled-up sleeping bag, torn open at the seams, and some empty beer cans. I stood there for a while, feeling something tight in my chest. This place felt wrong. I didn't know why. Maybe it was how hidden it was. Or maybe the thought of someone camping here without anyone knowing. I stepped back out and looked around again. That's when I noticed the footprints continued past the tent, deeper into the draw. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave right then, but my legs moved on their own, following the tracks. The bushes closed in tighter. Some had long thorns that scraped my arms. The path dropped into a small gully. The earth was dark and cracked, and old roots snaked across the ground. I kept following, feeling sweat drip down my back. After maybe 50 feet, I saw something lying under a tree ahead. At first, I thought it was trash, just a pile of clothes someone dumped. But as I got closer, I realized it was a sleeping bag, dark green and zipped up tight, lying in the dust under the shade of a stunted pine. It looked newer than the one in the tent. I stopped a few feet away, staring at it. It was shaped wrong. It didn't lie flat like an empty bag would. My mouth went dry. I listened for any sound, but heard nothing. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to step forward. The bag didn't move. I could see now it was zipped all the way up, with the drawstring pulled tight around the hood. It was covered in dust and little twigs. I felt like I was going to throw up. I squatted down beside it, staring at the zipper. My hands shook. I reached out and tugged it open a few inches. The smell hit me like a fist. Rot, sweat, stale urine. I gagged and stood up, backing away, wiping my mouth. I didn't open it further. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside. I turned and walked away fast, almost running, not caring about the thorns scratching my legs. I scrambled up the slope, using my hands to pull myself up the loose dirt. My breathing was ragged, my chest tight. When I reached the ridge, I didn't stop. I kept going back the way I came, boots crunching hard on the rocks. My mind was spinning. Who was that? How long had they been there? Why was there a second-old camp down there, completely hidden? When I finally saw my trailer again, my legs felt numb. I climbed over the fence and went inside. I locked the door behind me for the first time since I moved in. I sat down at the table, staring at my hands. They were scratched and shaking. I thought about calling the police right away, but for some reason I couldn't move. I sat there for an hour, just thinking about that smell, that shape in the bag, the old abandoned tent. Finally I stood up and called them. They asked questions I barely heard. I gave them directions as best I could. Within an hour, 2 sheriff SUVs pulled up outside my place. I watched them from the window as they stepped out, putting on gloves and adjusting their belts. I walked out and showed them the ridge and where I had gone down into the draw. I stayed behind as they hiked up. The sun was starting to drop behind the hills, sending long shadows across the valley. It felt like years before I saw them coming back down. One deputy walked ahead, looking pale. The other was on the radio, speaking in short, clipped words. They didn't say anything to me except that I'd need to stay for questions. Within another hour there were more cars, men in plain clothes, and a coroner's van. The flashing lights made the dusty road look like a crime show. I sat on my trailer steps as they worked. The sheriff came over and asked me to describe everything I saw. I told him. I left nothing out. He wrote it down in a small notebook, nodding slowly. He didn't look surprised. He told me they would handle it from here. They would contact the landowner. They would run missing persons reports. He thanked me for reporting it. After they left, the hills were quiet again. But it wasn't the peaceful quiet I used to feel. It was heavy. like the land itself was hiding secrets under every bush and rock. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about those footprints, how fresh they looked. I kept wondering if they were old, or if someone else had been there just before me. I didn't sleep until the sun rose. A few days later, a deputy came by to follow up. He said the person in the bag had been dead for months, maybe longer. They found no ID. The landowner didn't know anything. There were no missing people matching what little they could tell about the remains. They guessed he was a drifter, someone who set up camp and never woke up. But I keep thinking about those footprints leading away from the tent and past the sleeping bag. They were newer than months old. I know what fresh prints look like in this dust. Someone else was there, maybe before me, maybe watching from somewhere up the ridge as I found the body. That thought has stayed with me every day since. I moved away 2 weeks later, packed up everything I owned in my small hatchback and drove east. I didn't tell the landlord why I was leaving early. I didn't tell my friends the truth either. They wouldn't understand how a quiet place you once loved could turn so fast, how the hills you thought were empty could hold things you never wanted to find. Even now, every time I hike alone, I find myself checking the ground for prints. I keep glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, silent, watching. The world isn't as empty as it looks from the ridge tops. Sometimes it hides things better left hidden, and sometimes it shows them to you whether you want to see them or not. That was the day I learned it's not the dark you need to fear most. It's what's lying silent in the daylight, just out of sight, waiting for someone to come close enough to find it. I woke up before the sun came up. My room was quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan above me. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the dark ceiling, feeling that heaviness in my chest that only comes early in the morning before your mind has fully turned on. My phone screen was bright when I checked it. It said 4:39 a.m. I didn't want to get up yet, but I had promised myself I would go for a long walk today before work. I needed to clear my mind. I'd been feeling restless lately, like there was some trapped energy under my skin that I needed to sweat out. So I swung my legs out of bed, sat there for a moment, rubbing my eyes, and finally forced myself to stand up. I put on my old gray sweatpants and a thin black hoodie. I slipped my feet into my walking shoes that were already by the door from yesterday's walk. I didn't bother brushing my hair or even looking at myself in the mirror. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment, locking the door behind me quietly so I wouldn't wake my neighbors. The air outside was heavy and still. It was mid-July, and the nights weren't exactly cool anymore, just humid and quiet. The street was dark except for the few yellow streetlights that flickered every now and then, casting long shadows across the parked cars. I walked down the block towards the small path that cut behind the rows of houses and led into a wooded area near the old factory grounds. I had discovered that path a few months ago when I was walking home from work late at night. It was hidden between two large fences, barely noticeable unless you knew exactly where to look. Most people avoided it because it led into what used to be a factory complex back in the 70s, then a warehouse, and now it was just a bunch of abandoned buildings with broken windows and cracked walls covered in graffiti. The path itself continued through a narrow strip of woods behind the buildings. It was mostly quiet in there, though sometimes you could hear animals scurrying around in the undergrowth. That morning, I walked with my hood up, hands in my pockets, feeling the warm air on my face. There were no cars on the road, no people walking their dogs yet. Just me and the faint rustle of leaves in the darkness. I reached the start of the path and slipped between the two fences. The concrete gave way to dirt and roots, and soon the streetlights disappeared behind me. The trees closed in from both sides, tall and unmoving, their trunks black against the even darker sky. I walked with my head down, staring at the ground so I wouldn't trip over any roots or rocks hidden in the dirt. After about 10 minutes of walking, the path curved to the left and widened a little, and up ahead I could see the first of the factory buildings looming out of the darkness. The structure was massive, 4 stories tall, its roof partly caved in on one side. The walls were covered in faded graffiti and old peeling paint. The windows on the ground floor were all broken, the glass long gone, leaving just empty dark holes like open mouths staring out at the path. I kept walking, following the path as it curved behind the buildings. The sun was starting to rise somewhere behind the thick tree cover, casting a faint blue light across the world. Birds were beginning to chirp faintly in the distance. I pulled my hood down and kept walking. That's when I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was a pile of trash. But as I got closer, I saw it was actually a small green tent, half collapsed, pitched awkwardly under a leaning tree right at the edge of the path. It looked old and dirty, with dark stains across the thin material. The flap was closed, and I couldn't see if anyone was inside. I slowed down as I approached it. I could smell something foul in the air, like rotting food mixed with stale sweat. I held my breath as I walked past it, trying not to look directly at it. I didn't want to know who might be sleeping there at this hour. I kept walking, picking up my pace. The path turned to the right, leading deeper into the trees before emerging near the river on the other side of the factory grounds. As I walked, I kept thinking about that tent. Who would sleep out here in the woods behind an abandoned factory? It was dangerous. People dumped garbage out here, old tires, broken chairs, even rusted shopping carts. There were raccoons and stray dogs. Once, I even saw a coyote late at night when I was coming back this way. The thought of someone sleeping in that tent made my skin crawl for some reason I couldn't explain. I kept walking until I reached the river. The sun was starting to come up now, casting streaks of orange and pink across the water. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of it flowing past the rocks. It was peaceful. I could hear birds singing louder now. I wanted to stand there forever and let the breeze wash over me, but I knew I had to head back soon to get ready for work. I turned around and started walking back the way I came. When I reached the section of the path where the tent had been, I slowed down again. But as I approached, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. The tent was gone. The spot where it had been was empty, just flattened grass and dirt, like it had never been there. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space. I looked around but saw no one. The trees were still. There was no wind, no sound except for the birds in the distance. I felt my heart start to beat faster in my chest. I turned around in a full circle, scanning the woods, looking for any movement. But there was nothing, just trees and shadows. I kept walking, trying to shake off the unease I felt. Maybe the person packed up and left in the last 20 minutes while I was at the river. It wasn't impossible, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The hair on my arms was standing up, and my stomach felt cold and tight. I walked faster, keeping my eyes straight ahead, trying not to look into the dark spaces between the trees. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Soft, careful footsteps on the dirt path. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe an animal. But the steps were too steady, too even, like someone trying to match my pace without being heard. I kept walking, trying to act like I didn't hear it. My breathing got shallower, and I could feel my palms sweating inside my hoodie pocket. The steps continued behind me, never speeding up, never slowing down, just staying exactly the same distance away. I wanted to turn around and look, but I was too scared. I felt like if I turned around, something bad would happen. So I just kept walking, focusing on my breathing, one step after another. My shoes crunched the dirt and small rocks underfoot. The footsteps behind me continued. My mind was racing, thinking about who it could be. A homeless person from the tent, some early morning jogger, but I couldn't hear any breathing or rustling of clothes, just the footsteps. After what felt like forever, I saw the end of the path up ahead where it squeezed between the two fences and opened back onto the street. I forced myself to walk normally, even though my legs felt like jelly. The footsteps continued behind me until I reached the fence. I stepped out onto the concrete sidewalk, and the sound stopped. I turned around quickly, my heart pounding in my throat. There was no one there. The path was empty, just a long tunnel of dirt lined with silent trees. I stood there, breathing hard, waiting for something to appear. But nothing did. I turned around and walked quickly back to my apartment. I kept glancing over my shoulder the entire way. I felt exposed out in the open. When I reached my building, I unlocked the front door and rushed up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I reached my apartment, unlocked the door with shaking hands, and locked it behind me. I leaned against the door for a long time, trying to slow my breathing. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up into the mirror, I was pale and sweaty, my eyes wide. I stood there staring at myself for a while, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment. My heart finally started to calm down. I changed out of my walking clothes and sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, thinking about what had just happened. I kept thinking about the tent that disappeared and those footsteps behind me. Who is it? Where did they go? Why didn't I see them? I got up and went to make some breakfast. As I stood there at the stove, stirring eggs in a pan, I kept glancing at the window that looked out over the street. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, but I still felt uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me even now. The hairs on the back of my neck kept standing up, and my stomach felt heavy and tight. When I finished eating, I sat there at the table, staring at my empty plate. I decided I wasn't going to take that path anymore. It wasn't worth the peacefulness of the river if it meant feeling like this afterwards. I would just walk around the neighborhood from now on, where there were street lights and houses and people. I didn't want to see that tent again or hear those footsteps behind me ever again. I got ready for work and left my apartment, locking the door behind me. As I walked down the stairs, I felt a little better. The sun was fully up now, casting light across the street and buildings. People were out walking their dogs, cars were driving by, kids were riding their bikes down the block. Life felt normal again. But even now, days later, I still think about that morning. I think about the footsteps behind me on that dark dirt path, how they matched my pace exactly, how they stopped the second I stepped onto the sidewalk. I think about the tent that vanished in less than 20 minutes, leaving only flattened grass behind. I think about how I never saw who was following me, and I realize that it's better I didn't, because whoever it was, they wanted to stay hidden, and maybe it's better I never saw their face. But sometimes, late at night when I lie awake staring at the ceiling fan, I wonder if they saw mine. I wonder if they remember me. I wonder if they're out there, waiting for the next early morning when I slip out before sunrise to walk alone in the dark. And I know for sure I will never take that path again. I don't think about 3rd grade too often these days, but sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I start to remember random moments from childhood. Things that felt normal back then, but feel heavy and confusing now. Like memories I buried deep because I didn't understand them, and only as an adult do they return with new meaning. When I was in 3rd grade, I had this teacher named Mrs. Todd. She was a short woman, shorter than my mom, with curly brown hair that was always tied up in a little bun on top of her head. She wore big glasses with brown frames and bright lipstick every day. I remember her smile the most. It was always there. It made me feel safe at the time. She'd stand in front of the class and smile so wide her eyes would squint a little, and she had these tiny wrinkles at the sides of her eyes that moved when she smiled. I thought she was so nice. To me, she was almost like another mom, except a bit quieter and calmer than my own mom, who was always rushing around with work and chores. She seemed to really like me. Whenever there was an art activity, she'd call on me to come get the supplies first. When we had to read stories aloud, she'd let me pick which page I wanted to read. She'd tell me I was smart, and when I solved math problems on the board, she'd say good job, and tell everyone else to clap for me. I remember feeling proud. I used to come home after school and tell my mom all about Mrs. Todd. I'd say how much I loved her, and how nice she was, and how I wished she was my teacher forever. My mom would smile and say, "I'm glad you like your teacher," while she was cooking dinner or folding laundry, not really listening, but I didn't care. I was just so happy to have someone like Mrs. Todd in my life. It felt like everything was normal. School was easy, life was simple, and my biggest worry was what cartoon would come on TV after I got home. Then there was that one morning that changed everything, even if I didn't realize it at the time. It was a Monday, I think. The sun wasn't even up when I woke up, and I remember feeling so tired as I got dressed in my jeans and blue t-shirt. My mom gave me toast and a banana for breakfast, and I sat half asleep on the couch, eating while I watched the news playing in the background. Then I grabbed my backpack, and she drove me to school. I remember the way the cold air felt on my face when I got out of the car and walked into the building. Everything felt normal. When I got to class, I went straight to my desk to put away my folder and pencils. Our desks had this pull-out drawer underneath where we kept our notebooks and stuff. I remember opening mine without thinking, expecting to see my spelling book and my half-finished drawing from last Friday. But there was something else sitting on top of everything. It was a glossy magazine. I didn't really understand what it was at first. I just saw shiny pages with people on them. But then I noticed the cover said Victoria's Secret in big letters, and there was a lady in underwear posing on the front. My heart started racing. I was only 8 years old. I didn't know much about that stuff, but I knew it wasn't something kids were supposed to look at. I felt scared immediately, like I had done something wrong, even though I hadn't. I pulled it out and just stared at it, my hands feeling sweaty. I looked around the room to see if anyone else saw me with it. The kid sitting next to me, his name was Brian, noticed me staring at the magazine. He leaned over to look at it. I remember his eyes getting wide, and then he whispered, "Whoa, where did you get that?" I just shook my head and said I didn't know. We both sat there staring at it like it was some forbidden treasure. I felt like I was going to get in so much trouble. I didn't want anyone to think it was mine. That's when Mrs. Todd walked over. I didn't even hear her coming. She was just suddenly there, standing by my desk. I remember the smell of her perfume, a sweet flowery smell that always filled the classroom wherever she stood. She looked down at us and asked what I had there. I was so scared. I didn't know what to say. I just told her that it was sitting in my desk when I got here that morning. She reached down and took the magazine from my hands, flipping through a few pages with a calm face. Then she looked at Brian and me, and she told me that Brian must have put it there. She said it in this soft voice, the way she always spoke, but it felt different this time. She kept saying it over and over. Brian must have put it there. Brian, did you put this in his desk? Brian must have put it there. Over and over, like she wanted me to believe it. I remember staring at my desk, feeling confused. After a while, I just said, "Yeah, I guess he could have put it there," even though I didn't believe it. Brian looked shocked, but neither of us said anything else. She just walked away with the magazine in her hands, humming softly as she went back to her desk. The rest of the day felt strange. I couldn't focus on my work. I felt heavy inside my chest, like something bad was happening, but I didn't know what it was. Mrs. Todd still smiled at me, still called on me to answer questions, but I felt a little scared of her for the first time. A few days later, she asked me to stay after class. All the other kids grabbed their backpacks and ran out, laughing and talking about cartoons and snacks and after-school games. I sat there at my desk, my legs swinging because they didn't reach the ground yet. Mrs. Todd came and sat in the chair next to me. She was smiling as usual. She told me that I was doing so well in class, that I was one of her best students, and that she was proud of me. I remember my chest feeling warm with happiness again, forgetting the strange magazine incident for a moment. Then she told me about this special field trip I could go on if I kept doing good in class. She said it would be just me and her, going to the Gulf of Mexico for the weekend. She said we could collect seashells and go swimming, and that I could even eat ice cream for breakfast if I wanted. I felt excited. I'd never been on a trip like that before, especially not without my parents. I remember thinking it would be so fun to spend a weekend with my favorite teacher, away from school, just enjoying the ocean and eating ice cream. I nodded and told her I wanted to go. She smiled and patted my head, telling me to keep working hard. For the rest of that week, I was extra good in class. I finished my worksheets first. I helped pass out papers. I erased the board after class without being asked. I remember every time she'd smile at me, I'd feel proud, like I was her favorite student in the whole school. I went home and told my mom about the trip. She didn't really respond. She just told me to wash my hands before dinner. I don't think she really listened or thought anything of it. Then one day, I came to school and Mrs. Todd wasn't there. There was a substitute teacher that day, a young woman with blonde hair who seemed nervous and kept dropping chalk on the floor. At first I thought maybe Mrs. Todd was sick, but the next day, she still wasn't there. Instead, the principal came in and told us we were getting a new teacher. The new teacher was a tall man with glasses and a deep voice who never smiled. I remember feeling so disappointed. I didn't know what happened to Mrs. Todd. I asked the new teacher once if she was coming back, but he just told me to focus on my reading. The rest of third grade felt dull. The new teacher didn't call on me first. He didn't tell me I was smart. He didn't smile at me the way Mrs. Todd did. I remember feeling sad about it for a long time. At recess, I used to sit under the big oak tree by the fence and think about Mrs. Todd and wonder if she missed me. Sometimes I even thought about the trip we never went on, imagining myself picking seashells with her and eating ice cream cones on the sand. But then I grew up. Third grade turned into fourth, then fifth, and before I knew it, I was in high school, worrying about tests and crushes in college. I didn't think about Mrs. Todd much during those years. I guess I buried the memory somewhere deep. It wasn't until years later, when I was maybe 19 or 20, that it all came back to me one night. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, reading random stories online. I came across a story about a teacher who got arrested for taking a student on a trip. I read the details, feeling a chill go through my whole body. My chest felt tight. I put down my phone and just stared at the ceiling, and suddenly the memories came flooding back. Mrs. Todd, the magazine in my desk, her soft voice telling me Brian put it there, her asking me to go on a trip with her alone, the way she always smiled at me. All of it came back, piece by piece, like putting together a puzzle that had been scattered for years. I remember feeling sick. My stomach hurt. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might break through my chest. I sat up in bed, staring at the dark room around me. I thought about how young I was back then, how I didn't understand anything, how I thought she was my favorite person in the world. But looking back, I felt this deep fear I can't even describe. It was like realizing a wolf had been petting me gently while I thought it was a dog. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there thinking about how close I came to something that could have ruined me forever. I wondered what would have happened if she didn't suddenly leave, if we really went on that trip, if I came back, or if something happened that changed everything I knew about life and trust and safety. Sometimes, even now, I think about her. I think about her short, curly hair and her soft flower perfume. I think about the way she smiled at me and told me I was smart. And I wonder where she is today, if she ever thinks about me, if she remembers the little boy who trusted her completely. I never told my mom about it. I never told anyone. It's just this memory I carry inside me, a memory that feels warm and comforting at first, until I remember the truth. Then it turns cold and heavy in my chest, like a stone sinking deeper and deeper. Every time I remember, it makes me feel small and scared again, like I'm 8 years old sitting at that little desk, staring at a magazine I didn't understand, while my favorite person in the world stood over me, smiling. I was about 11 years old when I learned that your own bed, the place you think is safest, can become the worst place to be. That night had started like any other. I remember my mom tucking me in, telling me good night, the hallway light left on because I was still too young to sleep in full darkness. I could hear the soft hum of the TV in the living room. I always liked that sound. It made me feel like someone was awake, like I wasn't alone. I fell asleep facing the wall. I had posters of spaceships and a glow-in-the-dark star stuck above my headboard. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. I didn't have a clock in my room, and the hallway light was off. It must have been real late. I remember feeling confused because my nose felt blocked and my chest felt tight, like I was having a dream where I couldn't breathe. But when I opened my eyes, the dream didn't go away. I was lying on my back, which I never did back then. My mind tried to catch up. There was weight on me, heavy weight pressing down on my chest and stomach, and something over my face. It wasn't a pillow. It was a hand. A man's hand, rough and wide, covering my mouth and pinching my nose shut at the same time. My eyes went wide, and for a second I just stared at him. My body felt frozen, but my heart was beating so hard I thought it might explode. I could see him because the moonlight came through my window, just enough to show the outline of his head and shoulders. He was leaning over me, knees on either side of my hips. He wasn't saying anything at first, just breathing. I could feel his breath on my forehead, hot and fast. I remember thinking that he smelled like sweat and dirt, like he'd been outside for a long time. Then his other hand came up and pressed my chest down harder. He didn't hit me. He didn't tie me up. He just leaned down closer until I could feel his chin brush my cheek. He hissed words into my ear. I couldn't really understand at first because my ears were pounding with my own heartbeat. He told me to roll over. He told me not to scream. I didn't know what to do. My chest burned and my throat wanted to scream, but it's like the sound wouldn't come out. I turned my head and his hand moved just enough for air to get in. I sucked in a deep breath, and then I did what he said. I rolled to my side, but I didn't stop there. I rolled again, right off the side of the bed. I hit the floor hard enough to bruise my hip. The sound was louder than I expected. It startled him, I think. I tried to scream then, but my voice cracked, like I'd lost it somewhere deep inside me. I remember the carpet under my fingers. I remember scrambling backward, kicking my dresser, my heels smashing into the bottom drawer. My lungs burned, but still no sound. He came off the bed fast. I could hear the old spring squeal. He was reaching for me when it finally came out, a scream, raw and ripping from my throat. It wasn't a word at first, just a sound, high and ugly. I heard my mom's door open down the hall. She must have woken up before I even realized. Maybe she heard the bed springs. Maybe she heard the dull thud of my body hitting the floor. She came so fast I don't even remember her footsteps. Just a blur in the doorframe, the shape of her robe, her bare feet on the carpet. The man turned toward her, his shoulders squared like he was ready to fight or run. I saw the moonlight hit his face, and I'll never forget it. He wasn't old, maybe late 20s or 30s, but his eyes were wide like he was just as scared as we were. My mom didn't stop. She didn't freeze. She didn't scream. She lunged at him, small but fierce. She grabbed his arm, nails digging in. He tried to push her off, but she clung on, scratching, clawing at his face, his neck. I could hear her breathing, like a wild animal, all gasps and growls. He tried to shove her back, but she bit his arm. I saw her teeth sink in, saw his elbow swing. She took a hit to the side of her head, but she didn't let go. The sound of her fighting him was louder than my own crying. My scream turned into sobs, and I crawled backward until my head hit the wall. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I just pressed them to my ears, but it didn't block it out. They stumbled against my bed. The covers ripped off, the lamp by my bed rattled and fell. The bulb smashed but didn't shatter fully. He tried to twist away from her, half dragging her across the floor. She screamed then, words I couldn't even make out, just raw and desperate. He shoved her hard enough she hit the side of my dresser. She went down to her knees, but she didn't stay there. She grabbed the edge, pulled herself up, and went for him again. She was small, just barely over 5 feet, but she was all fury. He backed up then, finally. His eyes flicked to the window. I saw it was open, the curtain fluttering. That's how he got in. The screen was popped out, hanging crooked. He turned and dove for the window. She grabbed the back of his shirt and almost pulled him back in, but he slipped through her hands. She lunged, reached out, and I thought she'd follow him right out. But she stopped at the sill, breathing hard, staring out into the dark. For a moment there was silence. No TV, no hum of late-night safety, no wind, no night birds. Just my mom panting and my own sobs echoing in my room. She turned then, came to me, pulled me up and held me so tight I thought I'd break. She smelled like soap and sweat and the faint scent of her perfume. Her hands were shaking so bad I could feel them even through my shirt. After that, everything blurred together. She locked the window, slammed it down so hard the glass rattled. She pulled me down the hall to her room. She called the police. I remember her voice then, shaking but trying so hard to sound strong. She gave our address, told them a man had broken in, that he tried to smother me. I sat on her bed, knees pulled to my chest, eyes fixed on the dark window at the far side of her room. The police came fast. Flashing lights turned our living room into a circus of red and blue. I remember the smell of wet grass from the officers' boots. They asked questions. I couldn't answer much. I just kept staring at the front door, half expecting him to walk back in. My mom answered everything. She told them how she'd found him, how he'd gotten in, how he'd escaped. She pointed out the window in my room, the footprints in the flower bed below it. They didn't catch him that night. They didn't catch him later either. They searched the yard with flashlights, dogs sniffing around the back fence, neighbors peeking out their doors in robes and slippers. The cops told my mom they'd do extra patrols. They'd keep an eye out. But deep down I think we both knew he was gone, vanished into the dark. After they left, my mom didn't let me sleep alone for weeks. She dragged my mattress into her room. We slept side by side on the floor. Every creak in the house made me flinch. I kept seeing his face every time I closed my eyes. I thought I heard the window creak open, the curtain flutter. I'd jolt awake and check, but it was always shut, locked tight. My mom added a new lock the next day, one of those bars you wedge into the sill. She nailed the screen down too. I didn't open that window for years after. During the day, I'd replay it all in my head. The weight on my chest, the rough hand over my mouth, the smell of him, the look in his eyes when my mom attacked. I didn't feel safe in my own room. I'd stand in the doorway and stare at my bed, at the dent in the carpet where I'd fallen. I asked my mom to move the bed to the other side of the room, away from the window. She did it that night, dragging it across the floor so it squeaked against the walls. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my mattress. It was too heavy for me, but I didn't care. I thought if he ever came back, I'd swing it at his head. My mom bought a new lock for the front door too. She got motion lights for the backyard and a little alarm that would beep if a window opened. The first night the light caught a raccoon, and we both jumped out of bed. She laughed after, but I could hear the fear in her voice when she told me it was nothing. I don't think I ever really slept the same after that. Even now, grown up, I double-check windows. I check the locks twice before bed. I get up to check noises that other people would ignore. I see shadows where there aren't any. But the part that sticks with me the most isn't him. It's her, my mom, small and barefoot, fighting a man twice her size because her kid needed her. She didn't think twice. She didn't freeze. She fought him off with her nails and her teeth and her fists. The police never caught him. They took fingerprints from the windowsill, but said there wasn't much to go on. No name, no face in a lineup. Just a vague description from me. Brown hair, wide eyes, scruffy beard, medium build. That could be half the men in town. Maybe he left town the next day. Maybe he stayed and watched us, blending back into his normal life like nothing happened. That's the part that used to make my skin crawl at night, wondering if I'd pass him in the grocery store, if he'd be at the gas station, just another face pretending nothing happened. But he never came back. We got stronger locks. We got a dog a few months later, a mutt from the shelter that barked at every knock and growl he heard. My mom started leaving a light on in the hallway again. And every night, for a long time, I'd hear her walk past my door before bed, stopping just long enough to listen, to make sure I was okay. I got older. We moved a few years later. A better neighborhood, a better lock on my window, but I still slept with something heavy by my bed. Even now, years later, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I find myself listening to the silence, waiting for that sound, that weight, that breath on my face. But it's not there. It's never there. Just the soft hum of my own house, the creak of old walls settling. I keep my windows locked, my doors locked, my phone close by. What he did taught me fear. What my mom did taught me that fear can't always win. She never let me see how scared she was until later, long after we'd moved and the nightmares got fewer. One night, when I was a teenager, she told me her hands shook for days after. I don't really know where to start, because every memory I have feels heavy in my chest. Some people tell scary stories about ghosts, creatures in the woods, people stalking them at night. For me, it was just my own life. My house wasn't haunted, but it felt like prison walls. Every wall was solid and smooth, the paint never peeling because my mother made sure of it. She liked things clean, pure, perfect, untouched. That included me. I wasn't allowed to go outside when I was little. I remember watching the neighbor kids run down the street in summer, barefoot and loud, shouting into the sun. The smell of fresh cut grass and tar melting on the street mixed with the sound of cicadas. But I was behind a locked window. My grandmother would close the curtains after noon because she said the sun could fade the carpet, and then she would scold me for leaving a nose print on the glass if I leaned forward too much to watch the kids. The windows always smelled like ammonia and old curtains. When I was 7, I asked if I could play on the front porch. My grandmother slapped her newspaper down on the table so hard her coffee mug rattled. She said bad men drive by and take children who sit outside, and did I want to be taken and chopped up? I didn't ask again for years. I stayed inside. I read books sometimes, but only the Bible or old prayer books because everything else was thrown away. My mother said they twisted your mind and made you disobedient. I wasn't allowed to cook either. She said the stove was dangerous and I would burn the house down, so she made every meal, and if I didn't like it, I didn't eat. When I turned 10, I thought maybe I was old enough to go with her to the store. She told me I was too slow, too clumsy, too easily distracted. I watched her leave through the little side window, the screen rusted at the corners, watched the car back down the driveway. I always felt a knot in my chest when she was gone, like I was holding my breath, because sometimes I thought she wouldn't come back. Part of me hoped she wouldn't. But then I thought about what my grandmother would do if I was alone with her, and I stopped hoping. By 13, I knew something was deeply wrong, but I didn't have words for it. I heard other kids at church talking about friends, school trips, staying the night at someone's house. I didn't have friends. I wasn't allowed to talk to other kids, and if they tried to talk to me, my mother would stand between us with a smile so sharp it made them shrink away. She told people I was shy and didn't like talking. That became my identity to everyone else. Silent, weird, shy. The truth was I had too many words trapped inside and no place to put them. I spent hours alone in my room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles, watching dust collect on the edges. I wasn't allowed to decorate my room. No posters, no photos, no colors. Just a single bed, an old dresser that smelled of mothballs, a thin carpet with a dark stain under the window where rain leaked once before I was born. My mother said the room was peaceful that way, uncluttered, pure. I felt like I was sleeping in an empty shell. As I grew, so did her grip. I wasn't allowed to walk to the mailbox. I wasn't allowed to take out the trash. She said people watched the street and would know I was alone, and someone would snatch me up and rape me. She said it so often that the word itself became a shadow in my mind, lurking behind every curtain. I wasn't allowed to lock the bathroom door. She said people who locked doors had things to hide. So I learned to bathe and use the toilet quickly, quietly, always listening for footsteps. I turned 16 and realized I couldn't drive. Other kids were getting their learner's permits, taking photos with big smiles and posting them on Facebook. I didn't have Facebook. I didn't have a phone. I didn't even have an ID card. My mother said she would drive me anywhere I needed to go. And if I didn't need to go anywhere, why would I need to drive? She said the roads were dangerous. Cars flipped over in the ditches every day. She told me about drunk drivers, murderers who followed teenage girls. She always ended the stories with, "You're lucky I keep you safe." I started to hate her. That hate felt like acid in my veins, burning every time I had to smile and nod. I thought about running away every single day, but I didn't have any money. She controlled it all. If I found coins in the couch cushions, I would hide them in an empty vitamin bottle under my bed. I would tuck folded dollar bills into old library books she had forgotten we owned, pushing them between pages about early colonial missionaries or the lives of saints. Each dollar felt like a little flicker of hope. When I turned 18, she told me I didn't need to apply for college. She said I wasn't smart enough to live on my own, that I would end up raped, pregnant, or dead. I believed her at first. She sat beside me on my bed that night, stroking my hair while I cried into my pillow, telling me she was the only person who loved me enough to keep me from throwing my life away. The next day, she told me she had prayed for me all night. I felt trapped in her love like an insect sealed in amber. At 19, something broke. Maybe it was seeing my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my eyes sunken, skin pale, hair greasy because I wasn't allowed to shower every day. She said it wasted water. Or maybe it was watching the clock tick from morning to night with nothing to do but clean, sit, read the same passages in the Bible, listen to her talk about demons and sin. I realized I would die there if I didn't leave. My body would just grow older, weaker, until I died in that room with the stained carpet and silent walls. So I started to plan. Every day, I would sweep the house, clean the kitchen, wipe down the bathroom, fold her clothes. When I did laundry, I would check every pocket for coins, for a stray bill left behind. She noticed once and snatched the dollar out of my hand, shouting that it was hers. After that, I learned to be quieter, to pocket the change when she wasn't looking. I kept it all hidden. My grandmother watched me like a hawk, her eyes sharp even behind thick glasses, so I kept my movements slow and careful. I saved for months. It was only 20 here, 10 there, a few 5s and 1s. I packed my bag in secret at night, folding each shirt quietly, hiding them under my bed so the suitcase looked empty if she opened it. I wrote down the bus schedule on the back of an old church bulletin I found in my Bible, memorizing the times and the cost. I practiced how I would walk down the street, how I would look back only once, how I would not run unless someone grabbed me. The day I tried to leave, my hands were shaking so badly I thought I would collapse before I reached the door. I wore my oldest sneakers and my hair in a braid so it wouldn't tangle. My backpack was heavy, but felt light with hope. I slipped down the hall at dawn, when I knew my mother slept deeply after her late-night prayers. I reached for the doorknob and felt tears fill my eyes because the morning air was right there, freedom was right there. But she was awake. She came from behind me like a shadow breaking loose from the floor, grabbed my braid and yanked me backwards so hard my neck snapped sideways. My backpack fell to the floor with a heavy thud. I remember staring at it as she dragged me down the hall, my socks catching on the carpet, the sun coming in bright and cold through the front window. My grandmother was waiting in the living room, standing with her cane like a guard. She said nothing, just watched as my mother pulled me into my room. I didn't fight. There was no use. My mother took my phone and said she was reporting it stolen, so I wouldn't call the police. She locked it away with her things. That night, she slept on the floor beside my bed. I woke up to the sound of her breathing in the dark. Slow, even calm. I lay there awake all night, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to her. I realized she wasn't just my mother. She was my prison guard. A week later, she took me to a church meeting. The Holiness Church was small, plain brick with dusty red carpet. They laid hands on me, pushed my head back, shouted into my face for demons to come out. My ears rang for hours after. I stood there swaying while they screamed prayers, my legs trembling, my chest so tight I thought I would pass out. I wanted to pass out. I wanted to disappear. When it was over, they told me I was healed, that I would stop wanting to leave now. My mother smiled with tears in her eyes. Weeks passed. I pretended to be better. I pretended to pray harder, to smile more, to nod when my grandmother told me about women who ran away and ended up murdered. But inside, I kept planning. I couldn't stop. Every time I swept the floor, I imagined sweeping it for the last time. Every time I scrubbed the toilet, I imagined never having to smell that bleach again. I saved money again, but this time I hid it better. I unstitched the lining of an old purse in my closet and tucked the bills inside, sewing it back up in tiny stitches. When I finally had enough for a bus ticket, I waited for the right day. She was taking me to another church meeting. My cousin came to visit that morning. She was a quiet woman, hair always pulled back tight, smile always forced. She told me she wanted to talk, to help me. My chest felt like it would explode with hope. I got in her car. The door closed. I reached for the handle, but it wouldn't open. Child safety lock. My heart dropped into my stomach like a stone. She drove me back home. She told me it was for my own good, that my mother was worried sick. I saw my mother waiting on the porch, tears streaming down her face, hands clasped in prayer like she had saved me from the edge of hell itself. They kept me isolated after that. I wasn't allowed outside at all. My mother slept in my bed for weeks. My grandmother sat in the hall during the day. My cousins visited often, their cars parked in the driveway to block me in. I spent every day reading the same passages over and over, my brain turning to fog. Sometimes I would stare at the wall for hours, tracing tiny cracks with my eyes. The only colors I saw were gray, beige, and shadows moving across. I woke up early that morning, before the sun even came up. My phone alarm buzzed quietly beside me, vibrating against the wooden table it was resting on, and I reached out from under my blanket to turn it off. The small cabin felt colder than usual. I could see my breath when I exhaled. The window in front of my bed showed only darkness outside, but I knew dawn would come soon. I pushed the blanket off and sat up. The air hit my skin and I shivered. My feet touched the cold wooden floor. I rubbed my eyes and let out a slow sigh before standing up to stretch my back. My old bones cracked like usual, even though I wasn't that old. Just felt that way sometimes. I walked across the room to the tiny kitchenette. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I put water in the electric kettle and turned it on. While it heated, I grabbed my faded blue jacket hanging on the chair and pulled it on. The cabin wasn't insulated very well, so mornings were always like this. I opened the cupboard, pulled out instant coffee, and tore the packet open. The smell was strong and bitter, but I needed it. Once the water was done boiling, I poured it into my mug, mixed it with the coffee, and took a sip. It burned my tongue a little, but I didn't care. I leaned against the counter and looked out the small window beside the sink. It was still dark, but I could make out the faint outline of the pine trees surrounding my cabin. They looked black against the slightly lighter sky. The forest here was dense. I lived about 2 hours from the nearest small town. I moved here a year ago to get away from everything. I was tired of the city, tired of people, tired of noise and lights and traffic. I bought this small piece of land with the cabin already on it. It had no proper heating system, just a small wood stove, and no running water except what came from a storage tank I filled every week. But it was peaceful. That's all I wanted. After finishing my coffee, I put on my boots and stepped outside. The ground was hard and frosty. The grass crunched under my feet as I walked around to the back of the cabin to check the generator. I always checked it first thing in the morning to make sure it still had fuel. Without it, I wouldn't have electricity at all. The metal surface was icy cold when I touched the fuel cap, but it was still mostly full. I screwed the cap back on and stood up, stretching my arms over my head. The cold air burned my lungs a little with each breath. I turned around to look at the forest. It felt like it was watching me back. The trees stood so close together, it was almost like a wall. There was a narrow path I had cut with my machete last year that went about 200 meters into the trees to a small stream where I collected water sometimes. I didn't like going deep into the forest, not because I was scared of animals. I had a rifle for bears if needed, but because it always felt off in there, like I didn't belong. That morning, I decided to walk to the stream to fill 2 jugs of water. I grabbed them from beside the cabin door, slung my rifle over my shoulder just in case, and started down the path. The frost covered everything in white. My boots slipped a few times on hidden roots, but I caught myself each time. As I walked, I could hear the quiet sounds of the forest waking up. Small birds chirping weakly, branches creaking overhead as the cold wind shifted, and the rustling of leaves somewhere deeper in. I reached the stream after about 10 minutes of walking. The water was clear and cold, moving lazily between smooth, dark rocks. I set my rifle against a tree, knelt down on the bank, and dipped one of the jugs in. The stream filled it slowly. As I waited, I looked around me. The trees were thinner here, letting a little more light through as the sun finally began rising. The water in the jug was icy to the touch. I set it aside and filled the second one. As I stood up to leave, I felt a strange feeling in my chest, like something heavy had been placed there. I looked around again, more carefully this time. I couldn't see anything, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I grabbed my rifle and held it tight against my chest. I stayed still for a moment, listening. There was nothing. No movement, no sounds except the gentle stream and faint birds far away. I shook my head to clear the feeling, picked up the jugs, and started walking back to the cabin. Every step felt heavier than normal. My boots sank slightly into the frozen dirt. My breathing was loud in my ears. Halfway back, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the empty narrow path I had come down. I looked between the trees but saw no movement, no shapes, nothing. I kept walking, faster this time. The jugs banged against my legs as they swung. When I reached the clearing around my cabin, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I set the jugs down on the porch, wiped my face with my sleeve, and went back inside. My hands were trembling a little. I put more wood in the stove, lit it, and sat down on the floor in front of it to warm up. I didn't understand why I felt so scared. I lived out here alone for a year and had never felt that way before. After warming up and eating a small breakfast of canned beans and bread, I spent the day doing small chores. I chopped some firewood, cleaned out the ashes from the stove, and checked the small shed behind the cabin to make sure no animals had gotten in overnight. The shed was where I kept extra fuel for the generator and my small tools. The door was still locked. Nothing was disturbed inside. I closed it again and walked around to the front of the cabin. The sun was fully up now, shining through the trees in pale yellow light. I decided to take a walk to the old logging road that ran about half a kilometer west of my cabin. It wasn't used anymore, but I liked walking there sometimes just to clear my head. I grabbed my rifle again, slung it over my shoulder, and started walking. The ground here was flatter, and I moved quickly. My boots kicked up dead leaves as I went. The logging road was covered in fallen branches and weeds now, but the wide flat space was still visible under the mess. I walked along it slowly, listening to the wind move through the treetops. About a kilometer down, I saw tire tracks in the dirt. They were old, mostly washed away by rain and covered by new leaves, but they were definitely tire tracks. I knelt down and touched them. They were faint, but I could tell they were from a big vehicle, maybe a truck. I looked around but saw no other signs of people. No wrappers, no broken branches, no cigarette butts. Just the old tracks in the dirt. I stood up and kept walking for a while before turning around to head home. I didn't want to be too far from the cabin before dark. When I got back, the sun was low in the sky. The light was orange and warm, but the air was getting colder again. I went inside, set my rifle against the door, and built up the fire. I made dinner, more beans, some crackers, and the last of my dried meat. I needed to go into town soon to buy more food. I wrote a small list on a piece of paper and set it on the table. As I ate, I kept thinking about the feeling I had earlier at the stream, the heaviness in my chest, the footsteps I thought I heard. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia from being alone so long. The mind played tricks when there was no one around to keep it grounded. That night, I went to bed early. I locked the door, pulled the curtains closed, and climbed under my heavy blanket. The fire crackled softly in the stove. The cabin was dark except for the faint glow from the embers. I closed my eyes, listening to the sounds of the forest outside. Owls calling to each other, branches scratching against the roof, the wind moaning quietly through cracks in the wood walls. I drifted off to sleep with those sounds around me. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise. At first I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again, a soft metallic clinking. I opened my eyes and stared into the darkness of my cabin. The fire was almost out. The room was pitch black. I reached over to grab my flashlight from the table beside my bed and turned it on. The bright white beam cut through the darkness. I swept it across the room, heart beating fast. There was nothing. Everything was where it was supposed to be. Then I heard it again. The clinking sound. It was coming from outside. I got out of bed, still wrapped in my blanket, and walked quietly to the window. I pulled the curtain back just a little and looked out into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the flashlight's reflection and the faint moonlight, I saw movement near the shed. I froze. There was someone standing there. They were bent over, doing something to the door of the shed. I could see the outline of their body, bulky and hunched over. My heart started pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I turned off my flashlight so they wouldn't see me. I stood there in the dark, staring at them. They were wearing dark clothes, but I couldn't see any details. The clinking sound was them trying to break the lock on my shed. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. My mind raced with what to do. I wanted to grab my rifle, but it was leaning against the front door on the other side of the cabin. To get it, I would have to walk past the window, and if they looked up they would see me for sure. I stood still watching. The person kept working on the lock. I could see their breath in the cold air. Finally, I took a slow step back from the window, keeping the curtain mostly closed. I moved as quietly as I could across the room to the door. My bare feet were freezing on the wood floor. I reached for my rifle, lifted it slowly so it didn't bang against the doorframe, and stepped back toward the window. I peeked out again. They were still there. The lock finally gave way with a louder metallic snap that echoed across the clearing. They opened the shed door and went inside. I couldn't see them anymore. My whole body was shaking now. I wanted to run outside and scream at them to leave, but my instincts told me that was stupid. I didn't know if they were armed. I didn't know if there were more of them nearby. I had been working night shifts at the warehouse for a few months. The place was about 20 minutes from town, hidden down an old cracked road with no streetlights for most of the way. Every night after work, I drove home half asleep with the radio off, windows down just enough to let the cold air keep me awake. My shift ended at 2 a.m. Most nights I was too tired to care about anything, but that one night felt different the moment I stepped out of the building. It was mid-January, and the air felt sharp in my nose when I breathed in. I walked across the parking lot, gravel crunching under my boots. My car was the only one left under the flickering yellow light. Everything was silent. Not even the highway in the distance made a sound. I unlocked the car, tossed my lunchbox into the passenger seat, and started the engine. The rumble echoed across the empty lot and made me feel exposed. I sat there for a minute with my foot on the brake, staring at the warehouse in the rearview mirror. The building was just a giant dark block against the night sky. I didn't know why I felt nervous. Maybe it was just how quiet everything was. I pulled out of the lot and started driving down the narrow road that led to the highway. My headlights lit up the twisted trees lining both sides. Most of the trees here were leafless in winter, their thin branches sticking out like claws. The road dipped and curved so many times that even at 40 kilometers per hour, I had to grip the wheel tight. I knew this drive by memory, but still felt tense every night. That night, I noticed something up ahead as I drove around the first sharp bend. There was a car parked half on the road and half in the bushes. Its hazard lights weren't on. As I got closer, I saw the front bumper was bent and hanging low, like it had hit something. The driver's door was wide open. I slowed down and drove around it carefully. My headlights lit up the inside for a second, but I didn't see anyone in there. It crossed my mind that maybe someone crashed and was hurt nearby, but I felt this cold hesitation in my chest. Something told me not to stop. I kept going, my car crawling forward until the crashed vehicle disappeared behind me. The rest of the road was empty. I kept looking in my mirrors, half expecting someone to appear behind me running down the middle of the road. My heart was beating hard for no real reason. and I tried to calm myself down by thinking about home, about crawling into bed under my heavy blankets. I reached the highway, turned right, and pressed down on the gas pedal. The road was empty in both directions. The orange glow from the highway lights reflected off the concrete barriers. I drove another 15 minutes before turning off onto the exit that led to my neighborhood. That's when I noticed headlights behind me. Two bright white lights reflecting in my mirror. I didn't see them coming up from behind. It was like they appeared out of nowhere. At first I thought maybe it was just someone heading home late like me, but the lights stayed perfectly in line with my car. I slowed down to turn into my street, and they slowed down too. I felt the hair stand up on my neck. I turned into my street, and the car followed me. I could see the shape of the vehicle in my side mirror, an old dark SUV with no front license plate. I drove slowly past my house. I didn't want whoever this was to know where I lived. I turned right at the next corner, then right again, and drove in a square around the block. The SUV followed each turn perfectly, not speeding up or backing off, just following at the exact same distance. I could feel my chest tightening. I was fully awake now, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles felt sore. I turned again and decided to drive back towards the highway. I thought maybe I could lose them there. I turned left out of the neighborhood and accelerated. The SUV stayed right behind me. As I reached the on-ramp, I floored the gas pedal and merged onto the highway. The SUV kept up without any trouble. We drove like that for several minutes. I moved into the far left lane. They moved into the left lane. I switched to the middle lane. They did the same. Every lane change I made, they copied exactly. My mouth felt dry. My mind was racing through possibilities. Maybe it was just someone driving home, and it looked suspicious because of my paranoia. Or maybe they were actually following me. I decided to test it. I turned on my right signal and took the next exit. The SUV followed. I turned right at the bottom of the ramp, then right again onto a smaller road that looped back to the highway. They stayed behind me the whole time, headlights bright in my mirrors. My stomach felt heavy. I felt like I was going to be sick. I pressed down on the gas pedal again and merged back onto the highway. We drove like that for another 10 minutes. I didn't want to drive home now. I didn't want them to know where I lived. I didn't know what they wanted or why they were following me. I took another exit and pulled into a gas station that was lit up and open 24 hours. The SUV kept driving down the road and disappeared around the corner. I sat there under the bright lights, engine still running, heart racing. I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No sign of them. I started to calm down a bit. Maybe it really was just someone driving home the same way as me. I got out to stretch my legs and buy a bottle of water from inside. The guy behind the counter was watching something on his phone. The store was silent except for the hum of the fridge units. I paid for the water and walked back to my car. As I opened the door, I looked across the street. There, parked under a dark patch where the street light was out, was the SUV. I could see the shape clearly now. It was an older model Toyota with tinted windows. The engine was off. No lights were on. It was just sitting there in the dark. My chest felt tight again. I got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a few minutes trying to decide what to do. I didn't want to drive home. I didn't want to stay here either. I started the engine and drove out of the gas station, turning away from where the SUV was parked. I could see in my mirror that it didn't move. I kept driving down the empty road, passing dark buildings and closed stores. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning. I didn't want to stop to plug it in. I just wanted to keep moving. After a while, I turned down a long industrial road lined with warehouses and empty parking lots. The road curved and dipped under an overpass where it was completely dark. I slowed down because the pavement here was always rough with potholes. As I drove under the overpass, I saw something that made my blood feel cold. The SUV was parked under the bridge, engine running, headlights off. As I drove past, its headlights flicked on, and it pulled out onto the road behind me. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal hard. My small car shook and rattled as it sped up. I could hear the engine whine. The SUV accelerated too. Its headlights were so close now that they lit up the inside of my car. I sped down the road, swerving around potholes. The SUV stayed right on me, matching my speed exactly. I was breathing so fast I felt dizzy. I turned down another road without signaling, tires squealing against the concrete. The SUV turned just as fast, barely slowing down. I could see it clearly in my mirror now. The driver's window was rolled down, but I couldn't see who was inside. The window was just a square of darkness. I kept driving, turning at random, trying to lose them. I felt my body shaking with fear. Every turn I took, they followed. I drove back towards the main road and finally saw lights ahead. A small police station sat on the corner, its front entrance lit up by bright white floodlights. Without thinking, I pulled into the parking lot and stopped right in front of the glass doors. I turned off the engine, grabbed my phone, and sat there breathing hard. The SUV drove past slowly, its headlights illuminating the interior of my car. I saw the shape of the driver, a man with short hair wearing a dark hooded jacket. His face was turned straight ahead, eyes hidden in the shadow of his hood. The SUV continued down the road and disappeared around the corner. I sat there in the car for almost an hour. My hands were trembling so badly, I couldn't even open the water bottle I bought. After a long time, I finally felt my breathing slow down. I went inside the station and told the officer at the front what happened. He asked if I got a license plate number. I shook my head. He told me to wait until I felt calm enough to drive home. When I finally did drive home, the streets were empty. Every turn I took, I checked my mirrors a dozen times. When I got to my street, I turned the headlights off before I reached my house and coasted into the driveway in silence. I sat there in the dark, listening, watching the street for any sign of movement. Finally, I got out and went inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made my heart race. I kept thinking about the SUV, about the man in the hood, about how he knew where I worked, how he knew the roads I took. The next day, I called off work. I couldn't go back there. I didn't leave the house for days, only staring out the windows at every car that drove past. A week later, I got a call from my boss saying they were letting me go for missing so many shifts. I didn't even care. I was too afraid to leave the house. I ordered groceries online and had them delivered to my door. Every night, I lay awake in bed listening for the sound of tires on gravel, headlights sweeping across my window blinds. Months passed and nothing happened. I finally started going out again during the day. I found a new job closer to home. I never worked night shifts again. Even now, years later, I can't drive at night without checking my mirrors every few seconds. Every time I see headlights behind me, my chest tightens and I feel that same cold fear spread through my body. I keep thinking about how whoever it was, they knew where I worked. They could have followed me home if they wanted. Maybe they just enjoyed the chase. Maybe they didn't need to follow me home that. I woke up around 5 that morning because I couldn't sleep. I had been sleeping on a thin mattress on the living room floor, half wrapped in a blanket that smelled like old detergent. My back hurt. It was late September, and the apartment was cold because the landlord hadn't turned on the heat yet. I checked my phone, but the screen didn't light up. Dead again. I left it charging in the corner and got up to make coffee in the small kitchen. The walls felt damp when I brushed my arm against them walking past. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a worn-down building at the edge of town. There were 4 apartments on each floor, and the hallway always smelled like stale cigarettes and whatever someone had cooked the night before. Outside my window was the streetlight, buzzing softly against the dark sky. I poured some cheap instant coffee into a chipped mug and waited for the kettle to boil. The kitchen window faced the alleyway between my building and the next one. It was narrow, just wide enough for a trash bin and a rusted old bike that had been chained to the fence for years. I often saw stray cats digging through the bags back there. After finishing my coffee, I put on jeans and a faded hoodie. I needed a walk to wake myself up fully. The sun wasn't out yet. The sky was dark gray, with a hint of morning blue at the horizon. The air smelled like rain from the night before. I left my apartment quietly, locking the door behind me. The hallway light flickered a few times. When I stepped outside, the street was silent. Only a couple of parked cars lined the curb. There were puddles on the cracked pavement, reflecting the streetlights. I walked slowly, feeling the cold air on my face. It felt peaceful for a while, walking alone before the town woke up. I decided to head towards the small public park about half a mile away. I crossed 2 empty streets, stepping over wet leaves that had fallen from the big trees lining the sidewalks. The park entrance had a metal arch with peeling green paint. Inside, it was silent. The swings creaked a little in the breeze. I walked to a bench near the edge of the park and sat down. I could see the rooftops of houses past the park fence. Some of their windows were lit. people waking up to get ready for work. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, just breathing and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Then I noticed something that felt off. Across the park, near the old public restroom building, I saw a person standing. At first I thought it was a homeless man because there were often people sleeping on the benches or under the slides. But this person was standing completely still, facing the restroom wall. They were wearing dark clothes. I couldn't tell much from the distance, but their posture was stiff. I tried to look away, but I felt uneasy, so I kept glancing back every few seconds. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring at the bricks. I told myself they were probably just high or tired, leaning on the wall. I stood up and started walking down the path towards the other exit. As I walked, I kept checking behind me. They didn't turn or follow. But when I was about halfway down the path, I turned around one more time. The person had turned their head slightly. I could see their face from the side, pale against the dark clothes. Their eyes looked wide open, staring in my direction. I felt my chest tighten. I walked faster, trying not to look again, but curiosity forced me. When I turned my head again, they were no longer facing me. They had turned back to the wall. I walked out of the park and into the street, feeling my heart beat in my neck. I walked home quickly. When I reached my building, I looked back towards the park, but there was nothing visible from that distance. I went upstairs and unlocked my door. The smell of cold coffee and damp walls felt comforting after that walk. I sat down on my mattress and tried to calm myself down. I told myself it was just a junkie or someone drunk from last night. I tried to read some news on my phone, which had charged a bit by then, but I kept thinking about the way they had stood there, perfectly still, staring at the wall for so long. Around 7, I got ready for work. I worked part-time stocking shelves at a grocery store 2 streets away. My shift was from 8 to 12. I put on my store uniform, grabbed a protein bar from the cupboard, and left the apartment again. The morning air had warmed a little. People were out walking their dogs. Cars moved along the main road. Everything looked normal. When I reached the store, I clocked in and went to the back room to get my cart of boxes. My coworker Liam was there, yawning and rubbing his eyes. I nodded to him, and he nodded back, but we didn't talk. We usually didn't. I spent the next few hours cutting open boxes and placing jars and cans onto the shelves. My hands smelled like cardboard and dust. Customers started coming in around 9, mostly old women with baskets and tired eyes. The store radio played the same 4 songs on repeat. I tried to keep my mind busy with the work, but the image of that person in the park kept coming back. The way they turned their head, the wide eyes, the stiff posture. It felt unnatural somehow. I told myself again that I was just overthinking it. At noon I clocked out. I decided to take a different route home to avoid passing by the park again. I walked down a street lined with old brick houses. Most of them had small front yards with rusty fences. Some had broken windows boarded up with plywood. As I walked past one of the houses, I noticed the front door was slightly open. There was a thick chain lock hanging from the handle, but it wasn't hooked. The door just hung open an inch or two. I felt a chill run down my arms. I kept walking, feeling my breathing get heavier. I didn't want to know who was inside. When I got back to my apartment building, the mailman was putting letters into the boxes. I checked mine, but it was empty. I climbed the stairs, my legs feeling heavy. As I was putting my key in the lock, I felt like someone was watching me. I turned my head quickly, but the hallway was empty. The light flickered again, buzzing softly. I went inside and locked the door behind me, sliding the chain lock across. I took off my uniform shirt and threw it on the mattress. My stomach growled, so I went to the kitchen and boiled instant noodles. I sat on the floor with the steaming bowl in my lap, staring at the dark screen of the TV. Later in the afternoon, around 3, I lay down and closed my eyes for a while. When I woke up, it was getting dark again. The sunset cast orange light on the walls. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my manager reminding me to come in early the next morning for inventory count. I felt a headache growing behind my eyes. I stood up, stretched, and decided to take out the trash. The bag was heavy and dripping slightly from the bottom. I tied it tightly and carried it down 3 flights of stairs, breathing through my mouth so I didn't smell the old food. Outside near the dumpsters, the alley felt darker than usual. The light bulb above the door had burned out. I could hear the sound of rats scurrying in the trash. As I lifted the dumpster lid, I smelled rotting vegetables and sour milk. I dropped the bag in and closed the lid quickly. When I turned around to go back inside, I saw a person standing at the end of the alley near the street. They were just standing there, facing me. I couldn't see their face clearly because it was dark, but I felt the same cold feeling spread through my chest. I walked towards the door quickly. The person didn't move. They just stood there, watching. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, locking it behind me. My breathing felt sharp and shallow. I climbed the stairs as fast as I could. When I reached my floor, I turned back to check through the window at the end of the hall. The alley was empty now. My hands were shaking slightly as I unlocked my apartment door. Inside, everything felt silent and heavy. I closed all the curtains and turned on the small lamp next to my mattress. The light flickered a little but stayed on. I sat there with my back against the cold wall, listening for any sounds outside. I heard nothing but my own breathing. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster with my eyes. My mind kept going back to the person in the park and the one in the alley. Were they the same person? Why were they just standing there, staring without moving? Around 2 in the morning, I finally dozed off. I woke up again at dawn. My neck was stiff from sleeping against the wall. The light coming in from the edges of the curtains was pale and gray. I felt empty inside, like I hadn't really rested at all. I got up, washed my face in the small bathroom sink, and put on my work uniform again. My eyes looked tired and hollow in the mirror. I grabbed a banana and left the apartment. The hallway felt colder that morning. Outside, the street was silent except for the distant sound of a truck backing up somewhere. I walked to the store quickly, keeping my eyes forward. The town felt empty, even though I saw cars passing by. I reached the store, clocked in, and started stocking boxes again. The same music played on the radio. At lunch break, I sat on the milk crates in the back room, eating a stale sandwich I had packed. The manager walked past, giving me a nod. I finished quickly and got back to work. The day felt long and heavy. When my shift ended, I almost felt scared to leave. I didn't want to walk home alone again, but I had no choice. I stepped out into the afternoon sun, keeping my eyes on the ground as I walked. When I reached the park road, I felt my heart tighten. I forced myself not to look towards the park, but curiosity made me turn my head for a second. There was no one there. The swings moved slightly in the breeze. That night, when I was lying on my mattress, I heard something outside my window. A soft scraping sound. I sat up slowly, listening. The sound came again, like someone dragging their nails lightly across the window screen. I stood up and walked to the window, holding my breath. I pulled the curtain back quickly, but saw nothing. I woke up that morning feeling restless. My back was aching from sleeping on the old mattress I had brought into the small cabin I rented for the month. It was in the middle of nowhere, just off a narrow dirt road that curved around tall pine trees and disappeared into a thick forest. The cabin was old, probably built in the 70s, with wooden walls that smelled like dust and dampness, and a tin roof that clicked and popped in the heat of the day. I was staying there to get away from everything for a while, just to think and write and live quietly. I liked waking up to the sound of birds instead of honking cars, and seeing trees instead of brick walls outside my window. I pushed the thin blanket aside and swung my legs over the edge of the mattress. The floor was cold under my bare feet. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the wooden floorboards, listening to the silence around me. There was no phone signal there, so I couldn't scroll for updates or messages like I usually did when I woke up. I just sat there, feeling my breathing slow down and my shoulders relax. After a while, I got up, put on a faded black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, and went to the small kitchen area to make some coffee. The cabin didn't have much. Just a small table with 2 old chairs, a sink with a metal tap that squeaked, a gas stove with 2 burners, and a tiny fridge that buzzed loudly at night. The windows were dirty and streaked from rain that had come and gone over the months. I poured water into my kettle, lit the stove with a lighter, and waited for the water to boil. As it hissed and steamed, I looked out through the window and saw the morning light filtering through the trees. The sun wasn't fully up yet. Everything looked gray and pale blue outside, like the world was holding its breath before the heat of the day took over. When the kettle screamed, I poured the water into my mug with instant coffee and stirred it slowly. The smell woke me up more than the taste ever did. I took my mug and stepped outside onto the small porch. The wooden planks creaked under my feet. I sat on the steps, feeling the cold air on my face. It felt good. I sipped the coffee, feeling its heat spread into my chest. I could hear birds calling to each other, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. There was always a sense of quiet tension in those woods, like something was always moving out there, just out of sight. I stayed there for a long time, sipping the coffee slowly. After I finished, I went back in, washed the mug, and put on my shoes. They were old running shoes with frayed laces, but they were comfortable. I decided to go for a walk down the dirt road. It was something I did every morning since I came here. The dirt road curved past the cabin, went down a gentle slope, and disappeared into the forest. It wasn't a maintained road. There were potholes and rocks and overgrown grass on the edges. Sometimes fallen branches blocked parts of it. I walked slowly, hands in my pockets, looking down at the road. There were small stones and crushed pine needles everywhere. The air smelled fresh, mixed with the earthy scent of wet soil. As I walked, I saw animal tracks here and there. Mostly deer, sometimes raccoon, and once I saw what looked like coyote tracks near a puddle that had dried up. I never saw a coyote though. They stayed hidden during the day. I walked for about half an hour until I reached a fork in the road. To the right was a narrow path that led deeper into the forest. I had never taken that path before. I always felt uneasy about it. The trees on that side grew thicker, and the shadows between them always looked darker, even during midday. I stood there, looking down the path. The sun was higher now, golden light slipping through the canopy, making long lines on the ground. The air felt cooler near that path, like the trees were holding in the night's chill. I don't know what made me do it that morning, but I turned right and started walking down the narrow path. The branches hung low, brushing against my arms. I could hear twigs snapping under my shoes. There were spider webs stretched between the branches, and small black flies buzzing around the damp ground. As I walked, the light grew dimmer, filtered through the thick branches overhead. The air smelled of moss and rotting wood. I could hear something dripping in the distance, like water falling onto rocks. I kept walking, feeling my chest tighten with every step. There was a feeling in the air, like I was walking into a place I shouldn't be. The path curved to the left after a while, and I found myself standing in a small clearing. The ground was uneven, with old tree stumps covered in green moss and patches of dark, wet soil. In the middle of the clearing, there was an old wooden shed. I hadn't expected to see a shed there. Its roof was slanted and covered in dead leaves. The walls were gray and peeling, with green streaks of mildew running down from the roof. The door was slightly open. There was a rusty lock hanging on the handle, broken. I stood there, staring at it for a long time. My stomach felt tight, and my hands felt cold even though the air was warm. I didn't know why I felt so uneasy, but I did. I walked slowly towards the shed, feeling every step on the soft ground. I reached out and pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, echoing into the quiet woods. Inside, the shed was dark and smelled like wet dirt and rotting wood. The roof leaked in places, and small ferns were growing from cracks in the walls. There was an old workbench against the back wall, covered in rusted tools and broken jars. There were empty shelves with peeling paint, and a metal bucket lying on its side. The floor was littered with dead leaves and dirt. I stepped inside, looking around. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the gaps in the wooden walls. I saw something in the far left corner. At first I thought it was just a pile of old tarps and sacks. But as I walked closer, I saw that it was a sleeping bag. It was unzipped and flattened, stained dark in places. Next to it was a plastic water bottle, half full, and a crumpled brown paper bag. There were empty cans stacked against the wall behind it. Beans, corn, tuna. All cheap canned food. There was also a small rusted pot with black burnt marks on the bottom. I felt my throat tighten. Someone had been living there, and recently. The water bottle still had clean water in it. I looked around quickly, feeling like someone was watching me from the shadows. I listened hard, but I only heard the sound of dripping water from somewhere outside. My chest was beating fast now. I turned and walked out of the shed quickly, my feet crunching on the dead leaves. Outside, the clearing felt too quiet. I looked around, feeling the hairs on my arms stand up. I didn't like how it felt there. I didn't like that someone was living so close to my cabin without me knowing. I started walking back down the path, faster this time. My feet stumbled over roots and rocks, but I kept going. The shadows felt thicker around me, and the smell of rotting leaves was strong in my nose. When I reached the dirt road again, I stopped to catch my breath. My heart was still beating hard. I looked back down the path, but all I saw was darkness between the trees. I started walking back towards my cabin. My mind was racing with thoughts. Who was living there? Were they dangerous? Did they know I was staying nearby? Did they watch me walk past every day? The rest of that day, I stayed inside. I locked the cabin door and pulled the curtain closed. I sat at the small table, staring at the wood grain, feeling my chest tighten every time I heard a sound outside. The wind rustling the trees sounded like footsteps. The creak of the roof sounded like someone walking above me. I didn't make dinner that night. I just ate crackers and drank water, sitting in the dim light of my single lamp. When it got dark outside, I turned off the lamp and sat in the darkness. I didn't want whoever was out there to see the light from my window. I sat there for hours, listening. The forest was alive with sounds at night. Crickets chirping, branches creaking, owls calling from somewhere far away. Every now and then I heard a rustle in the bushes near the cabin. My body tensed each time, and I held my breath until it went silent again. Eventually, I went to the mattress and lay down. I didn't take off my clothes. I pulled the thin blanket over myself and stared at the dark ceiling. My ears strained for every sound outside. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. The air felt heavy and cold. I heard something outside the window. It was soft at first, like a foot scuffing against the dirt. Then I heard it again, closer to the window. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart thudding in my ears. I heard the sound of breathing, slow and quiet, but heavy. It was coming from just outside the window. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling my hands go numb. The breathing stayed there for what felt like forever. Then I heard footsteps slowly moving away from the window, crunching on the leaves and twigs outside. I lay there until the sky outside started to lighten with dawn. When morning came, I sat up slowly. My whole body was trembling. I felt cold sweat on my back. I got up, walked to the door, and slowly opened it. The morning air was cold and damp. I stepped outside and looked around. There were footprints in the dirt near the window. They were from boots, worn out ones. They circled the cabin, then disappeared into the woods towards the dirt road. I felt sick to my stomach. I packed my bags that morning. I put everything into my car, locked the cabin door behind me, and drove away down the dirt road without looking back. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. I didn't tell the owner of the cabin when I dropped the keys off in town. I just wanted to leave that place and forget about it. But even now, back in the city, sleeping in my own bed with locked doors and windows, I still think about those footsteps outside my window. I think about the heavy breathing in the dark. I think about the shed in the forest, the sleeping bag, the cans of food. I didn't plan on staying at the rest stop that long. I only meant to pull in, stretch my legs, splash some water on my face, and get back on the road before sunset. I'd been driving for hours through the flat open land between states, chasing work and cheap motels. The old sedan I drove was getting too hot, and so was my head. I had my window down for hours, but the warm air was no help. So when I saw the sign for the rest area, I took the exit without thinking much about it. It was one of those small stops, just 2 picnic tables under a metal roof, a single bathroom made of cinder blocks, and a cracked parking lot. There was one other car there when I pulled in, a faded red pickup with rust along the fenders. I parked a few spots away. The sun was dropping low, but still threw hard light at the dry ground, making everything look washed out. I shut the door and stretched, feeling my spine crack. I glanced over at the pickup, but didn't see anyone inside or around. The engine was cold, windows rolled down, a couple empty fast food cups in the bed. I didn't think much of it. I headed for the bathroom first. The inside was what you'd expect. One flickering light overhead, smell of bleach barely covering up the mildew. I splashed water on my face and stared at myself in the cloudy mirror. My eyes looked bloodshot, skin splotchy from the heat. I pressed my hands against the cold sink and just stood there a while, trying to cool down. Back outside, the sun was lower now. The long shadows made the picnic area look less inviting, but I sat at one of the tables anyway. My back was stiff, and my hands were shaking a little from the long drive. I pulled my small cooler from the car, got out a bottle of water, and some old gas station sandwiches. I sat there and ate slowly, chewing while staring at the pickup. Still no sign of anyone. The wind picked up, carrying grit, and dry leaves across the lot. It rattled the roof above me. I finished one sandwich and drank half the water before deciding I needed to lie down for a minute. I opened the back door of my car, pushed some clothes aside, and stretched out across the back seat. I left the door cracked open so air could move. I figured I'd just rest my eyes for a few minutes. When I woke up, the sky was turning dark blue. My neck hurt from the angle I'd been lying in. I sat up, blinking hard. The air was cooler now but smelled dusty. I looked around, trying to shake off the sleep. The red pickup was still there, hadn't moved an inch. I rubbed my eyes and climbed out of the car. I needed to pee again before hitting the road. As I walked toward the bathroom, I heard something behind me, just a quick crunch of gravel. I turned fast but didn't see anything. Maybe an animal, or just the wind knocking something loose. Inside the bathroom, the single bulb over the mirror had stopped flickering and now just hummed. I did my business, washed my hands again, and splashed more water on my face. I felt strange, restless, like my skin didn't fit right. I leaned forward, staring at myself again, and noticed a small smear of dirt on my cheek. I wiped it off with the back of my hand and noticed my hands were trembling again. I told myself it was just the long drive, the nap, the bad food. When I stepped outside, the sun was gone. The sky was almost fully dark. There were no lights in the lot except for a single lamp above the bathroom door. My car sat under it, dull silver in the half-light. The red pickup was just a darker shape now. I felt uneasy seeing it still there with no one around. I got back to my car and started loading my things in the trunk. I checked my tires by habit, kicked each one lightly. Then I heard that crunch again, gravel shifting, a small scrape. I looked up fast and caught something move at the edge of the trees that circled the rest stop. A dark shape, low to the ground, slipping behind a thin trunk. My breath hitched. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a raccoon. I slammed the trunk and climbed into the driver's seat, locking the doors out of habit. I stuck the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered once, then went silent. I turned the key again. Nothing, not even a click. I sat there, key halfway turned, staring at the dashboard like it might change its mind. I tried again. Just a dull thud somewhere under the hood. My stomach turned cold. I turned off the key, sat back, and rubbed my face. I didn't have roadside assistance, and my phone was nearly dead. I had an old flip phone with barely 2 bars of signal in this empty stretch. I popped the hood and got out. The warm air of the day was gone. It felt heavy now, damp. I lifted the hood and propped it open. I stared at the engine like I'd know what to do. I checked the battery cables. They were tight. Nothing obvious. I tapped the battery casing and felt a soft vibration through my fingertips. I looked over at the pickup again. Still there. Still no sign of life. Something about that truck bugged me. I kept glancing at it while fiddling with the battery. I thought about walking over, but the longer I stood there, the less I wanted to get close. There was something about how dead it looked. Doors unlocked, windows down, a stale smell drifting from it when the breeze shifted. I closed the hood quietly and walked back to the driver's seat. I shut the door and locked it again. I sat there in the dark, my eyes bouncing from my dead dashboard to the pickup. I pulled my phone from the cup holder. 2 bars. I dialed the roadside number printed on my old insurance card. It rang once, then cut out. I looked at the screen. No bars now. I tried to call again, but the phone beeped once and went black. Battery dead. I dropped it on the passenger seat and rubbed my forehead. I told myself I could sleep here till morning, flag someone down when the sun came up. I tilted the seat back and tried to get comfortable. The air inside the car felt hot, even with the cracked window. I thought about getting out to walk around, maybe clear my head, but every time I looked at the dark shape of the pickup, I stayed put. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, it was darker. The lamp above the bathroom flickered, throwing shadows across the cracked pavement. My mouth was dry. My neck hurt again. I sat up slowly and froze. The driver's door on the pickup was open now. I hadn't heard anything. The inside light was dead, so all I could see was the door hanging wide, black-shaped where it should be shut. I stared at it so long my eyes watered. I listened but heard nothing except the wind rattling the metal roof over the picnic tables. I reached for the flashlight I kept in the glove box. I clicked it on and aimed it at the pickup. The beam bounced off the faded paint, caught the edge of the open door. Nothing moved. I couldn't see inside, too dark. My hands were slick with sweat. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe someone came back. Maybe they'd been in the trees. Maybe they just stepped away to piss in the woods, and now they were back. That's what I told myself, but my gut said otherwise. I shut off the flashlight, not wanting to draw more attention to my car. I sat there, my ears straining for anything. The wind died down and the night pressed in close. I felt like I could hear my own blood. Then another sound, a soft, slow shuffle on the gravel. It came from behind the pickup. I leaned forward, squinting through my windshield. I couldn't see anything past the truck's shape. My mind started running. Maybe someone was trying to siphon gas. Maybe they were drunk and looking for trouble. Maybe they were waiting to see if I'd get out. I stayed frozen like that for what felt like forever. The shuffling stopped. No more noise. I leaned back slowly, trying to steady my breathing. My fingers brushed the door lock, checking it again. Still down. I don't know how long I sat like that. 10 minutes, maybe 20. My back ached, legs stiff from being braced to run if I had to. Then I heard another sound, not from the pickup this time. Closer, from behind my car. A light tap, like a shoe on metal. I flinched so hard I hit my elbow on the window. I forced myself to look in the rear view. I couldn't see anything in the mirror, too dark. I thought about turning the flashlight on again, but didn't want to give away that I knew something was there. I sat dead still, trying to keep my breath quiet. Then a shadow moved across the bathroom light. Just a sliver of shape, but enough. Someone was crouched low by the back bumper, moving around my car. I could hear a faint scrape, metal on metal. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The shadow slipped out of sight toward the passenger side. I waited, every muscle locked. I could feel my pulse thudding in my throat. Then the handle on the back passenger door rattled. Just once, soft but clear. I nearly lost it right then, but I stayed still. The handle rattled again, harder this time. I don't know what they expected. Maybe they thought I was asleep. Maybe they thought they'd get in easy. I pictured my trunk keys, the old tire iron under the seat. I wanted to grab it, but didn't dare move. The handle stopped rattling. Silence again. I waited, counting my breaths, fighting the urge to run. Then another sound, footsteps, soft but steady, moving around to the other side. I looked over at the driver's door, picturing the shadow standing there, inches away. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. I felt it, like the air changed around me. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep my breath quiet. The footsteps stopped right by my door. I stared straight ahead, vision swimming. Then a knock. Just one sharp tap on the window beside my head. I jerked back like I'd been shocked. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping they'd think I hadn't heard it. Another tap, harder. I couldn't sit there anymore. I reached down slow, feeling for the tire iron. My fingers found the cold metal. I wrapped my hand around it, trying to stop my shaking. The tapping stopped. Silence. I cracked my eyes open, listening. I heard the soft scuff of shoes moving away from my door, back toward the pickup. I shifted